I was 15, and I was walking home from school. It's fall, so the days are getting shorter now. Walking down a neighborhood street that leads to my house, I noticed something in the corner of my eye as I turned onto the corner of my street. It appeared to be like a wolf-man creature standing at the end of some woodline, poking out. Immediately, I was transfixed and virtually had no idea what it was I was looking at. I kept staring at the creature and saw that I thought it was about maybe 10 feet tall. But I can tell you, it was for sure covered with this jet black fur, looking very similar to that of a dog. The beast kept looking at me, and I noticed it was not fully a dog, but rather had the characteristics of that of a human. It was a distressing sight, and one that made me feel quite ill. I kept walking briskly to get home. When I did, I immediately told all my family, and they still don't believe me. It's taken me 18 years to put this down, but I know it's time. Time to heal and make sense of the trauma that has latched itself onto my life. See, I'm much older now, obviously. Married and have 2 kids. I'm 34 and have the most wonderful husband in life. But I can't forget what happened in October of 2003. It's funny. As time goes on, it seems a world away now. A strange time when technology did exist, but we couldn't do much on it. Not like now. A little background on me. I was the youngest of 5 girls and lived with 3 of my sisters and my parents in our large country house here in Ireland. I'll never forget the night when my elder sister and I were arguing over something silly. I think she had broken my hairdryer with her naturally curly hair. That always seemed to be getting in my way somehow. We had a huge argument in the top room, as we called it. That is the living room, which was situated at the top of our house, which was built on the almost vertical slope. From the top room, we had a huge window that had a view of the surrounding countryside. Fields beyond fields, the perfect scene to gaze out on and meditate. I mean, neither of us were focused on the scene, but rather were furious with each other. We were home alone, so no parents were there to intervene. As we continued screaming, we saw a flash of purple light come from the window. It was October here in Ireland, so it was pitch black. So the immediate flash of light was startling, causing us both to scream. I looked at my sister and watched as the color completely drained from her face. We both thought perhaps it was a car passing by the country road below. "It's Dad," my sister said. "He must just be pranking us." My dad was a notorious prankster, but even I felt he couldn't pull such an elaborate prank. Not like this. I edged closer to the window and looked out. The fields below me were cloaked in darkness, and in the distance, I could see some lambs resting on the grass. All seemed serene, or so I thought. My sister screamed again, pointing in the direction of the lambs. I stuck my face to the window, raised my hands around my temples to focus, looking out, scanning for anything unusual or dangerous. She told me she saw something move, out there, beside the lambs. Something dark. I reprimanded her, told her it could just be a cow or maybe a bale of hay. But she was even paler now. We both remained in the room and just decided to watch some TV. Although, as we stared at the screen, I know for a fact that neither of us could enjoy the program, but were feeling a sense of uneasiness and dread. The next thing that happened was probably the worst moment of my life. The purple light flashed again from the outside, filling our top room with a startling purple light. It then seemed to zap completely, and once again, we were immersed in total darkness. My sister and I both screamed and ran to comfort one another. We both naturally looked out at our surrounding fields for any evidence of what could have caused this light. We didn't need to look out at the fields. About 10 yards away from us, outside our window, and right beside our car, was a monster or beast such as I had never seen before in real life, or in any movie since. It was maybe 7 to 8 feet tall, towering over my modest Clio car, and staring dead at us in the face, with a look of curiosity. This creature was standing like that of a human, but covered in matted fur. It had a huge six-pack, rippling muscles all throughout its calves and legs, chest and arms. This thing looked like a flipping dog bodybuilder. We both stood at the window, transfixed and unable to process or comprehend what we were seeing. My sister moaned in terror, and she said, "We're gonna die." And she broke down right there. I couldn't respond. My eyes were just glued to this creature as I traced its broad shoulders, coated in this dark fur. I studied its face, which was both dog and human. It looked disgusting. It could have looked remotely handsome had it not been for the fang-like teeth or the small beady yellow eyes. This thing looked like it was full terror. I didn't know what to do. I was locked in a stare. It must have been about 15 minutes when a car drove past our house and the headlights illuminated this beast. At this, it got down on all fours and scuttered into the hedges, fully disappearing from sight. The electric went back on immediately, and we both felt utterly grateful that this beast had not come any closer or tried harming us. After that incident, we told our parents, who in turn then informed the police. They took down all the information and passed it on to an environmental agency whose specialty it is to deal with wild animals. The person told us that there were strange sightings in the area, but conclusively didn't have enough evidence to make a move on it. And of course, the police didn't want to deal with it. This could have been a major news story. They were really just wanting to bury it. But I just thought of that creature and what it truly could have been capable of. What if it could have harmed a child? Could the thousands of people missing in Ireland have been caused by this apparition of a creature? All these questions not only haunted me then, but they continue to haunt me. Although it's been 18 years, I still can't shake the memory out of my head, nor can my sister. We both want answers. I don't live very far from where the incident took place, and my family still live in the home to this day. I can even look out my bathroom window and see the garden, the top room, where 18 years ago, 2 young girls stood in black terror, facing death straight in the eye. I clutch my kids tightly when the memory comes back, when they play outside, amongst the green fields and the golden sun. I don't take my eyes away. If I do, I can't find them. Terror fills my being. I have a feeling the creature is still out there somewhere, and I'll die myself before I let my children be harmed by this thing. It was a relaxing morning, by all accounts, and I had just finished my shift at the hospital I'm working at. I'm trying to recall exactly, but this would have been early October, around last year of 2020. COVID cases were going up fast and things were getting scary. Every day, I began to feel more and more hopeless. Being a doctor during a pandemic is no piece of cake. Well, this morning was destined to be just for myself. I was making an omelet, assembling all my toppings on my chopping board. The cooking is immensely relaxing to me, and I was feeling all well this morning, trying to remain positive. However, I had woken up with a scratch on my neck and noticed when brushing my teeth. To be honest, it freaked me out as I didn't know what in the world had happened. However, I dismissed it and thought I must have moved awkwardly during the night, right? I set down my omelet on a plate and then went to use the bathroom. As I came down to the kitchen to get my food, I noticed it wasn't there. I paused and was confused. I then began to doubt myself and checked everywhere. I began to think I was having maybe a concussion and was getting freaked out. However, at that moment, I heard a growling sound and looked out on the patio. On my patio was the strangest creature I had ever seen. It was crouched on the ground, covered in fur, and it resembled some type of ape dog thing. It had large fang-like spikes jutting out of its back, like they were some kind of weapon. Lo and behold, the creature was sitting there, waiting for me, like it was wanting to pounce. It was that of dog and man, I guess, intertwined. Its eyes looked wild and feral, but very human. It had large teeth like a Rottweiler, and its face was coated in this thick mane. Think like a lion's, but black. It was terrifying. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach watching this thing inches away from me. I debated whether or not I should call somebody, but it was immensely difficult to move a muscle. I began to fear I was just having a hallucination. My aunt actually, after all, had suffered from manic mental health issues and had similar sightings, so I wondered if maybe the stress of the year had caused me to have a breakdown. But I know what it was that I saw was more than real. It was before me, as real as any object in nature could be. I mean, all sorts of questions began firing off my head. What was this? Why was this here? What did it want from me? And more importantly, what is this thing capable of? I began to understand why some people like having guns. If I had a gun, I would have no doubt shot this thing in the face. This creature continued sitting there, eyeing me, like it was waiting for the right moment, as if it wanted me to make the first move, like it was being sly, as if I had somehow accidentally caught it in the act of doing something, and now, last minute, it was trying to make a move. I focused and concentrated, running to grab my phone. I called the police and explained everything, and unfortunately, by the time they arrived at my apartment, there was no trace that this thing had even left. I explained my job and the stress I was under to the police, and they left me in peace, thanked me for my service. However, I knew what I saw was real. This being or creature or animal, whatever, was an actual flesh and blood thing. I'm not crazy. I've never had hallucinations like that in my life. It is something out of this world. I also feel like it's important to note I don't watch your fancy horror movies. That's not me. Hell, with the pandemic, I hardly have time for anything. Something, dare I say, otherworldly, and all my scientific reasoning is not enough to explain or comprehend what this was. I just hope that I never see this thing again, and it leaves my brain, my community, and myself in peace. Luckily, I'm pretty busy to distract myself, so I don't have these thoughts intertwining in my day-to-day life. Thank you for being an outlook for people like us. Even if our stories don't always sound the most believable, I know there's somebody like you who will allow us to vent and share and express our stories. It was a cold, wintry night, and the year was 1998. I had just split from my girlfriend and was feeling pretty awful about it. My days were filled up with depression and isolation. I spent a lot of time in my head just basking in self-pity. One of my favorite pastimes was to walk into the woods at night, close to my house. There was a huge expanse of dense forest, home to many creatures. I did not feel any fear at all, but rather put on my rain jacket, a torch, and set off on my way. This was before phones or GPS, so I just had to trust my own intuition would bring me on the right path. It always seemed to work, for the most part. On this night, however, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an eerie feeling, one that I had never experienced before. I just kept walking along my walk and shook it off. Depression could do these things to your mind, I knew. And about a half an hour into my walk, I saw something blue ahead. Now, I couldn't make out what it was, so I kept walking towards it. Strangely enough, I didn't feel that much fear, but rather a sense of curiosity. What other creature would be roaming in the forest at this time, especially one that was blue? Now, as I got closer, I realized the creature or person was about the same size as myself. It was sitting down on a small embankment beside the river. It seemed to have had a long blue trench coat on, and I just assumed it was somebody who liked to walk late at night and kept walking. But some primal part of my brain was causing me to feel anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd encountered danger. As I passed in front of whatever or whoever it was, I heard a gasping sound, and my head immediately turned to the sighting. It was the most petrifying, horrifying thing I'd ever seen. Its face was ghostly white, empty sockets for eyes that emitted this orange light. It had no nose, but rather just nothing. A small mouth. Its skin was white and pulled tight against it, as if it had been dug up from a grave. I tried to scream and then immediately began to run back, not looking. Every so often, my mind would seem to hear the gasping sound, and I began to run faster and faster, anticipating that this thing was following. When I got home, I dropped to my knees and thanking the Lord for sparing me. I had no idea what it was that I encountered in the deep woods, but to my untrained eye, it appeared something supernatural and demonic. I still have nightmares about this incident to this day and just wish it never happened. But needless to say, I live very far away from that area, and I have no reason to visit there. But the memory is still etched into my brain. The eyes of the creature, its mouth and its skin, everything about it. I know I should probably try counseling for this incident, but it's just too traumatic to talk about. That's why I'm writing this down. Maybe this email will help me clear up my mind. I suppose I should give you some context. This happened in the mid-80s in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was a hot summer's day, and we were all getting ready for my eldest daughter's wedding. We had been looking forward to the event for months. We all couldn't wait. In the weeks prior to the wedding, my youngest daughter had been acting strange. She kept staring out of her bedroom window, gazing out into the woods beyond, and even seemed distracted. When we tried to get her pumped up for the wedding, she didn't show any real interest. How odd. I was worried. My youngest, whom we'll call Tammy, has always been very vivacious and excitable. I had no idea what was going on with her. The night before the wedding, we all went to bed pretty early, including myself and my husband. Now, it's important to note, I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. as I heard a strange sound. Remember, I'm a brave girl, and I felt no need to wake my husband, who could usually never be roused from sleep anyway, especially during the night, and once he's out, he's out. So, I put on my housecoat and my slippers, walked down the stairs to investigate. My mind was still confused from having woken up from a deep sleep, so I didn't notice immediately that Tammy was staring out from the patio door into the woods. Tammy was around 8 at the time, and was dressed in a long white nightgown. I called to her, but she didn't answer. As I moved in closer, I was getting exasperated and scared. I had no idea what was wrong with my daughter, or why she was looking out so much into those woods. But as I took her head and led her back to bed, I gazed out too and saw something terrible and frightening. It appeared to be a man, but not a man. Rather, some sort of creature in the form of one. Chalky, burnt skin, wrapped in what appeared to be this cloth. As I looked closely, it had no eyes, but rather 2 large hollow holes. Its nose, too, was caved in and looked more like a beaten-in skull. This thing was terrifying, and terror filled my entire soul, and I wondered, what in the world was I looking at? Would we have to call off the wedding? This was clearly what my daughter had been so transfixed with for the last few weeks. Immediately, I raced up the stairs and put my daughter to bed, and got into bed myself, hoping that the creature would spare myself and my family. I had no idea what to do. Would people think I was crazy if I told them? Would the authorities put me in a mental institution? This was also the mid-80s, and mental health just meant somebody was crazy and dangerous. So I just went, fast asleep. When I awoke, I wrote an account of everything I had seen, but I have kept that documentation hidden for many years now. I am only now ready to share it if you want to reach out to find more. Tammy was never the same after that incident, and has spent much of her life in and out of mental institutions. I work with the University of Paris. It's my job to explore the deep woods, identifying strange and fascinating animals, gathering as much evidence as I can of new and endangered species. It's a wonderful job, really, but occasionally you do encounter some really bizarre things. As a matter of fact, one of these times was around 2004, back when I was just a rookie trainee. I was buzzing with the newness of the job, fresh out of college, and had such an enthusiastic energy to work. I went on a hike up a nearby mountain with two of my colleagues. The mountain overlooked a vast expanse of forest, and you could just see rows and rows of trees as far as the eye could go. It was a wondrous and beautiful sight. As we reached the peak of the mountain, we decided it was best to camp out. It was still a calm and wonderful night. However, it didn't remain still and calm for long. That night, at around 2 a.m, I was awakened with my colleagues by a loud yelling. We unzipped our tents and immediately charged off to investigate to see what it was. We seemed to grope around in the darkness and saw nothing or any evidence of what this could have pointed to. Eventually, we all just walked to the embers of our campfire and huddled around. It was dying out, but we decided to wait for a few minutes to see if whatever made this noise would maybe make an appearance. I, for one, was super excited, as I thought I was going to get to see something maybe cool or edgy. I went to grab my camera, but at that moment, we heard a gasping sound. We turned around and saw something I've never seen before. It looked gross, like this pale-looking thing on all fours, crawling around. It didn't have much of a face, but knowing what I do now, my only guess is that this was a crawler, I think they call it. It ran off and scurried. I tried to trace this thing, but it was already gone. The only thing I saw was its bright white skin. My eyes were able to lock onto it, but not for long. The initial excitement and youthful curiosity I felt had soon dissipated, and I felt a sense of dread, and also a sense of rightful arrogance at thinking I knew or had the capacity to understand the extent of the full natural world. Here before me was something that looked so different than anything I had ever been accustomed to, and my heartbeat grew louder by the second. My two colleagues were hyperventilating beside me. Would we be killed by the beast, or would our own lungs be overcome with weight of the horror before us, and eventually drown our young bodies of oxygen? I could tell this thing was still watching us from the woodline. It wasn't too far in the shadows. Its disgusting-looking face, I'll never forget it. I had always been filled with a sense of wonder within nature, a sense of how each species is wonderful and ultimately deserves a place. But I knew if I had a gun, this thing would have been dead, no hesitation. This and the natural realm was no part to play together. The creature, after an hour, seemed to wander off and be gone. At least, that's when I stopped feeling watched. We would still hear weird sounds from time to time, but I almost wonder, maybe it was hunting prey and we got to see it, whatever it was. Why had we not been killed? Did it not want to come after us? To the untrained eye, this thing looked violent, something that had been awakened in our senses. Maybe we disturbed its territory, I don't know. Anyway, after the sighting, myself and my colleagues stayed up and just huddled together around the dying embers of the fire. We cradled close by when the sun began to rise. That's when we got up, began packing our stuff. As I had my backpack on, we were exiting. I looked back one final time at the small plot we had camped on, gazing out into the greenery, lit now by the morning sun. I could have sworn I saw this thing again, peering out at us, watching us leave its territory. But I knew we had crossed something, some boundary of regulation, that we had somehow maybe awoken within the forest. It might sound cheesy to say an ancient forest, but again, I have never seen anything like this, nor did I know it existed. In fact, the only reason I called it a crawler is because one of my friends brought this to me once I explained what I saw. He's really into, I think you call it cryptozoology, so he knows all about this stuff, and explained to me that there's a cryptid called a crawler, and said it almost matches identical to what I saw. So I can't claim that is what I saw, but I guess it would make sense if cryptids exist. Although, to be honest, I've never really given cryptids much of a thought. Hell, I barely even know anything about Bigfoot. But that's my experience. Take it or leave it. This happened when we were going through the Redwoods in California. This was a very remote part of California, so there were no cell phones or any kind of communication we could have used. The sun had not come up yet, and it was in one of the most isolated parts of the state. Or so it felt. I'd been camping with 5 friends in a very deep patch of forest in Northern California. We spent our days hiking around the woods, exploring, huddling around campfires at night to keep warm. My friends and I were all experienced hikers who thought we knew how to survive out in the wilderness. But this time, we went off trail for an adventure hike to one of the longest areas, which led into a heart of a mysterious part of the Redwood National Park, what we believed to be a secluded area. Due to how dense the foliage was, we assumed it had been remained unexplored by man for who knows how long. We knew we were getting deep into the remote areas, and the further we went in deeper, the deeper it became. It became more of a green labyrinth of trees that grew thicker and denser towards the center. We told ourselves that if we got lost, which was unlikely, I had gone on this type of expedition many times before, and it would be easier to find our way back by following our own footsteps until we bumped into a familiar landmark or area. Now, the sun set at around 6 p.m., giving us about 6 hours of sunlight left for hiking through this unknown, uncharted part. As night approached, my friends decided they wanted to take a break from hiking, just to relax, so they could recoup their energy for tomorrow's adventure. They built this huge fire, and we sat around, telling stories and eating. All sorts of stories. The night forest became alive with strange shadows dancing on the trees. But we kept our spirits high, telling stories of haunted places near where we lived back home. We talked about how frightening it would be if an axe murderer could get into your house, or even to find out in this dark wilderness where absolutely nothing was familiar. We laughed at each other for being scared, and after a few minutes, one of my friends put along a song of Elvis Presley. We all started singing along to it. Afterwards, we all stared deep into the fire pit and began to talk more about what scary things are out there. I'm sure some of us were thinking about Bigfoot or other monsters that supposedly live out here. At first, we all kind of agreed nothing really scary lives out here, and we were just kind of freaking ourselves out. and then strange stories began to come out more and more. One friend said he knew a story of a ghost apparently that lived up by a lake, and you could die just by looking into it. Yet another friend talked about how many people disappeared into Oregon's national parks, never to be seen again. David Paulides, missing 411, you know, the whole gamut. They talked about hidden creatures deep in cave systems, which people were being taken into. Yada yada yada. One of my friends even claimed he once saw Bigfoot while hiking through Nevada. Every time somebody told a new story or took the rabbit hole deeper, it would just freak us out more, and then we'd laugh and make fun of each other for being scared. And we kept reassuring ourselves, there's nothing dangerous out here. Stop. But then everybody would jump as we all heard a sudden noise, which sounded like it came from a large animal. And then there was silence. That's when I began to think about how scary this deep forest was actually becoming. We were pretty far out here. I took my friend's story about Bigfoot seriously and started to tell them ghost stories. I told them about this Sandman who climbs through your windows while you're sleeping and steals your soul, never letting it return again. It's a character in children's books that comes at night and puts dust on your eyes. My friends were like, whatever man, you're so full of crap. But I laughed and even got a little freaked out myself because they kept talking about things being in the woods. Of course, I mentioned the Sandman thing to be jokingly, of course. But then, one of my friends sees movement over by one of the trees, which is covered in shadow. She screams and says it looked like somebody or something was trying to shake the tree behind it. We all look, and to our horror, there actually is something there. This large figure moving behind the tree. My friend, thinking it was a trick of the light or dark, grabs his flashlight, shining it in that direction, illuminating this partial figure. And just like out of a movie, we saw that this thing had these deep glowing eyes. That's when we all began screaming, jumping up from our camping spots, running to the tents. Some of us were grabbing weapons, while others were huddling in the tents for safety. This thing was thrashing through the brush, wailing like the most twisted, terrible animal you could imagine. We turned on our flashlights, desperately trying to defend ourselves with light, in case it came at us. But really, what would that have even done? Thankfully, we didn't see anything out there again that night. I can't sit here and say I'm an expert about what we saw. We were terrified. Nobody else knew exactly what they were seeing either. But I've never been so frightened before in my entire life. And for days after that, everybody was talking about how scary those woods are, or where it did go. We knew we weren't imagining things, because everybody saw it. Even I. And I was probably the least scared out of all of us. Even just a little freaked out. The weird thing is, we never reported the incident. It was as if we had all mutually agreed that it wasn't our place to tell anybody. I mean, we were probably trespassing on private property as it is. Nobody else should really know about this, right? In fact, the only reason I'm even sharing this story with you guys, I figured you could use more stories like this to put in your books or read to your audience, whatever. And also because I never want to see a thing like that ever again. So please, don't let me ever go camping again. But if you do, make sure you and your friends are drunk first, in case you run into seeing a Bigfoot, or so I think we did. I've always had a fascination with the deep woods. I grew up hearing stories of strange creatures like Bigfoot and critters like the Loveland Frogman. Now, even as a kid, I was absolutely fascinated by these tales. Some people might think it's just kid stuff, but at night, when my parents would go to sleep, I could never fall asleep because all I could ever do was think about what lurked within the forbidden and mysterious forests that surrounded our tiny little town in here in California. It had been almost 20 years since they tore down the old abandoned factory, right near where we lived. So, therefore, there weren't any more scary urban legends for me to be deathly afraid of. My parents said it used to be an evil place where bad people did things, like satanic rituals, animal sacrifices, that sort of thing. The story they told me, though, was of a man whose daughter got kidnapped while playing in the woods by something they referred to as the man with no face. Supposedly, he had no face, and if you ever saw him, you would die. They just used to scare me with that story. I mean, I guess my fascination with scary stories and experiences began pretty early on in life. As a kid, I really wanted to have an encounter with some sort of being from beyond. Growing up, there were many times where we went camping or hiked into what anybody would call the deep woods, right? With friends or hiking excursions, or even hunting and fishing. I've done it all. My father said that this particular forest area here in Cali was once thriving with bears and other wild critters. I always thought that was pretty cool. He said that in the early 1800s, it was actually one of the largest uncut forests in all of Cali, and there were thousands of buffalo roaming. My parents would tell me things like these in hopes to keep me out of the forest. They knew how fascinated I was with them, but sometimes my brain just couldn't stop thinking about what lived deep within its mysterious walls. I would sneak off for an hour or two by myself. The area I live in is similar to a haunted woods type setting. Lots of creeks, some of which run through waterfalls, old abandoned homes and factories, small lakes, big rocks and boulders, caves, sometimes hidden, and other natural formations with cool names like Devil's Slide and Devil's Punch Bowl. It's a very secluded area that hardly anybody ever goes to. I mean, it's so hard to get to. But I'm sure if you put in the time to get there, you would for sure have an encounter with something. I remember one day, after hours of fishing on this particular lake that is surrounded by woods on both sides, which pretty much describes any lake, right? Gosh, I'm terrible at descriptions. But I digress. There weren't any birds chirping or squirrels running around. The forest had gone silent. Pretty disturbing. On top of all that, we noticed how unusually dreary and foggy it had gotten all of a sudden. This was a warm day, with a clear, beautiful sky, just not even 30 minutes prior. It wasn't even foggy in the area, so where did this come from? I think maybe we get about 2 days a year where you can't even see past 20 feet. This was strange. We all figured it was from some sort of, well, we don't know. I guess I'm not really sure what to even come up with. I really have nothing to explain it. So we ended up packing up and heading back towards the car. We took this as our sign to abandon ship. The path we took through the woods were on both sides very thick, lots of overgrowth, bushes, and brush. Now to your left, there was this old abandoned dilapidated house. Then to your right, lots of full rocks, boulders, and eventually, if you went the path, it would actually take it to a cool waterfall. In that moment, I was so wrapped up in my own thoughts that my friend and I didn't even notice the figure. It slowly came closer, and when we finally noticed, we saw this eerie black figure walking towards us from another path. We got a really bad feeling instantly. We stopped dead in our tracks, looked at each other, wondering, what could this thing be? And waited for it to come and get us, for maybe a second, just trying to process and frozen in place. My heart almost beating out of my chest. But I couldn't run. Something inside me was telling me if I ran, this thing was going to catch us. Now, to describe to you what on earth this thing was, I can't. It was glitchy, if that makes sense. Electrical. It looked like a living, moving physical shadow of a man with an electrical outline, or kind of like a VHS tape does when it glitches out. Very staticky. It's terrifying. I mean, it made no sound, but you could feel this thing's energy projected onto us. We fled, without even hesitating another second, somehow able to fully convince our body to run. Now, this thing continued to pursue us. We ran and we ran, paying no mind to if this thing was really pursuing us further. I think at one point or another, I think we lost it. We had stopped to catch our breath, and the forest around us had begun to come back alive. I remember hearing the birds and thinking, oh, that's a wonderful sign. But the eeriness was still there. The feeling you could cut with a knife of dread was still lingering. We knew we couldn't stop in this spot for long. We were quickly looking around, in case this thing decided to show itself. Like I said, the forest was so thick you couldn't see past 10 feet in front of you. It's amazing how something as dangerous and terrifying as what we just saw could blend right into its environment. We made it out, alive and in one piece, they would say. We never talked about it after that, but my friend and I still talk about it to this day. At least, we didn't talk about it for a long time afterwards, so only recently have we begun to talk about it again. Hopefully that's not too confusing and you understand me. Anyway, we mentioned to each other and recounted the events, just to make sure either of us were not crazy. We both remember it the same as the other. I'll leave you with some advice. If you find yourself walking alone through the woods on any given day, don't be so sure that there aren't paranormal entities around you, able to go in and out of this very existence that we live in. I was working the night shift in a remote gas station at the end of a highway. It was the middle of nowhere, and the only other people around were a group of rafters camping up the river. That night, around 1 a.m, I was doing my bathroom weekly wipe down, and I stood in the middle of the bathroom and began to smell a very strange odor. It startled me. I kind of smelled it for just a minute and realized it was like that of rotting death or meat. So I looked up in search of the smell, but found nothing immediately. After stepping outside briefly, I looked around for any possible source, but I couldn't trace any. Then, just above me, I hear this whooshing sound, like something large flying directly overhead. I turn to look, and I see this dark black silhouette, shaped kind of like a giant bird or something, fly right overhead and fly right over the gas station. I'm thinking to myself, what did I just see? And I'm kind of stunned there in the moment, trying to process, is there some sort of giant owl or bird that flies around at night? Then it comes back again, this time flying over the gas station in the opposite direction. And this time, there was no mistaking what I saw. Attached to this thing were these two glowing red eyes as it flew directly overhead. Safe to say, I was terrified. As the only really attendant there, I ran back inside and hid. Because we're more of a rural gas station, really after about 10 or 11 p.m., our traffic flow really dies down. So I ran inside, locked the doors, and waited for maybe about 45 minutes before feeling safe enough to unlock them. I never saw really what it was close up, and whatever it was never flew down close enough for me to accurately see it. The rest of my shift would go on as pretty normal, and when I got off work the following day, I told a couple of my close friends what just happened. I'm not ashamed of it. I was outright open. They were actually pretty understanding and told me that, they said, man, it sounds like you had yourself a Mothman encounter. And I said, a what? And they're like, yeah, a Mothman. It's this demon owl cryptid that generally hangs around the West Virginia area. But it sounds like you had your own dose. Well, first off, I'm new to the whole concept of what a cryptid is, or a creature, or being, whatever it is you call them. So, my good friend kindly redirected me right at you and told me, this guy right here, email him. He can help you get some answers and clarity. So, that's exactly what I'm doing. And I'm wanting to ask you myself, did I see a Mothman? Or was this something else entirely? Maybe this was just a giant owl, and somehow the lights from the gas station caused its eyes to glow red. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of any rational explanation, because the logical thought of a Mothman actually coming near here, I don't know. It's just hard for me to process. Thank you for your time. This happened last summer, July of 2020. I have a pretty nice little house out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, it's a ways out in the countryside, but you know what? I enjoy it. So, one night, I'm sitting out on my porch, just enjoying the beautiful serenity that the night brings, smoking a cigarette. I'm lost in thought, thinking about whatever it was I was thinking about, and all of a sudden, I hear this giant thud, like something really heavy landed on the roof to my tiny house. Immediately, I shoot up and I'm looking around, and then, not even a few seconds later, I hear more thudding, as if whatever it was on my roof was now walking around. Now, I jump down off my porch to turn around and try to get a look at what had fallen on my roof. I turn, and to my horror, this being or thing was standing on my roof, looking at me. I'll do my best I can to describe it to you. It was a tall black silhouette with what appeared to be large bat wings or something, but they were kind of folded in. The body was a very weird shape. It was kind of human-esque, but it wasn't really like a head and body. It was just a body, if that makes sense. And it had two glowing red eyes, kind of tucked in between the wings, and it was staring at me. It wasn't a full moon out, so the visibility wasn't exactly the best. But as soon as I saw this thing, I dropped my cigarette. And for that split second in time, I had somehow managed to convince myself this is just a dream, you're hallucinating it, you need to go inside. But then, before I could even finish that trail of thought, this thing opens its wings and shoots off into the night sky, disappearing completely. Safe to say, I ran inside, locking my door, not going out for the remainder of the night. The next morning, I get up and go out there, and, of course, this thing was nowhere to be found. No traces of it, nothing. I mean, I guess with the events that transpired, I didn't really expect there to be any evidence or traces, but I don't know. Maybe in the moment, I just felt like observing my surroundings would hopefully give me some sort of closure. That maybe it was just a dream, maybe I just hallucinated it. So, I decided to take my encounter to the internet. I tried to do some researching and see what I could not find. Well, unfortunately, what I experienced was not a hallucination. Turns out, what I think I saw is something called the Mothman, originating from Point Pleasant. I had no idea this thing was even a thing, or it even existed. I don't know if it's a being or a demon or some sort of animal, but whatever it was, it terrified me, and I haven't seen it since, and I don't ever want to see it again. This isn't my story. It's actually a family friend's, so I'll change the names, just to keep their identity safe. Basically, a group of these teenagers were on a camping trip when they were attacked by this winged being, or a supernatural force, and they were basically forced to find the way to escape. My friend, or my father's friend, Kenny, was always the adventurous type, and wanted his kids to experience the great outdoors and all it had to offer. So, his son and his friends were convinced that they can handle doing a little camping and hiking, even if it bled into the night. Well, they were wrong. They had barely been on the trail for a day when strange things had begun to happen. First off, it wasn't too long into the trip when they all picked up on the feeling they were being followed by something. They couldn't tell what. It was just some sort of presence. Then, they hear the sound of twigs snapping and things like that. Something large in the trees watching them very closely. As a matter of fact, before even nightfall began, one of the kids thought they saw a strange, shadowy creature, and before they knew it, they were convinced they were being hunted. They turned to see a dark figure flying through the trees, sitting on one of the high-end branches, and it appeared to have red eyes, watching them, keeping track of their every movement. It appeared to be getting closer and closer each time, and they all felt it was going to attack them. Somehow, the kids managed to make a little makeshift campsite. They were planning on roughing it out through the night, and after a while, they looked at each other in confusion and wondered, why are they trying to do this? They should leave. They were also wondering if this was just some collective nightmare, and they needed to be more careful. They decided, we need to leave and get out of here. That night, this thing came into their campsite. That night, this thing pretty much enters their camp before they get a chance to disassemble, scaring them all to death. I guess it had tried attacking one of the kids, trying to grab them with its talons and pick them up. They all fled, screaming, leaving their couple tents and any equipment they had behind. They all grabbed whatever gear they could and ran as fast as they could in unison. And just when they thought they were safe, this dark figure was following them. They finally found a place to hide, but they had to keep moving. They had to find their way out of the woods. They finally saw light and realized it appeared to be a cabin close by the road, and they ran as fast as they could. This thing was now pursuing them through the trees, chasing them. They were in a portion of woods that had a lot of thick fir trees, so movement was kind of limited. They said they could hear this thing jumping through the trees, watching them, coming after them, like it wasn't trying to come down and swoop at them, but just keep track of them, like it was waiting. The kids kept looking behind them and saw that this thing was getting closer and closer, as if it was leading them to trap them. So, after a few hours of this going on, the kids had lost hope, but managed, even though they were exhausted, tired, and hungry, managed to make it to some back road they didn't know existed, just in the nick of time to hear somebody driving by. It was a lone trucker, and they knew that was the sound they had been waiting for. It was the sound of an approaching truck. They waved the trucker down, and he managed to be able to pull over and help these poor kids out. They were now freed, and their father came and gave them all a ride. This was back in 1977, and they still don't really talk about the experience. They don't know what followed them. They're all convinced it was some sort of creature. I thought the story is an interesting one, since I've been told it for a long time, and it's part of my family friend story. So I wanted to find out for them. You seem to know a lot about monsters and creatures. What do you think it was? Please, read this story in its entirety. The events are chronological to the best of my ability, and the reason I am posting this is because I think people who will read it will find this absolutely fascinating. I'm not a believer, but I am a hearer of the strange. I've spent a lot of time in Western Virginia and have been to every major area of sightings. I'm familiar with the lore, but never have been able to come across any real information. I am posting this because it may be of value to somebody. I have nothing to gain by posting this, and there is no attention or intention to try to cash in on the situation. I just feel that this is one of the most fascinating things I could have ever had happen, and I hope somebody else out there feels the same. I want to share this. So, this has been hard to type. It's been amazing but very emotional for me, and I want to do my best to recreate the events as they occurred. I will try to post this story verbatim as best I can. This happened on the night of Friday, January 16th, 2015. It was a very cold and windy night, and I was about to head to bed. I was on my couch with my wife and my dog, and we were watching a movie. About 10:30 or 11 p.m. rolls around, and I tell my wife I'm going to bed. I am a big-time insomniac, so I don't go to bed that early. I was looking out my living room window, and there was a big snowstorm coming in. The wind was whipping, and you could see the snow being blown by the wind. The temperature was below freezing. I closed the curtains and headed to my bedroom. As I'm walking down the hall, I hear a thumping noise coming from my back door, followed by a whistling noise. I went to the door, opening it up, and immediately, see this thing just outside my door, maybe 25 to 30 feet away from it, and it was night, so I couldn't make out every detail, but I could see it was kind of a grayish dark color. It was big, black, and had kind of a pointed beak and very large red eyes. It stood almost upright, but kind of at a slanted angle, and appeared to have what I can describe as wings on its back. It was very large. It was much taller than an average man, although I cannot give you a height estimate. I did not see that it had any ears or other facial details, but I could see that it was breathing and was looking straight at me. Not even 2 seconds later, this thing takes off straight up into the air at a very high rate of speed. As it went up, it makes a whistling sound, and you could see its wings moving really fast. As I see it go up, the moonlight kind of fades. So that's it. I closed my door and I was done. Unsure of what I just saw, I go back and tell my wife, and I say, "Honey, I just saw something up there I can't explain." And she could tell something was wrong. I was ghastly pale. Something was very wrong. I have no way to try and explain away what I saw, and it's honestly a mystery. While part of me wants to believe and accept that this was a Mothman encounter, part of me also wants to believe and accept it was something else entirely. What? I'm not sure. I live in Mason County, West Virginia, in the Mason-Mingo Junction area. I have 2 Mothman sightings in my entire life. The first was in 1992 to 1993. I was roughly 8 or 9 years old, and at this time, it was evening, and I was just getting out of the shower. Because of where our shower was in the house, I had to go and use my parents' shower. Theirs was really the only operable one at the time. So I'm getting out of the shower, getting dressed in my parents' bedroom. When out the window, I see this figure land and dart into this tree. The movement just naturally catches my attention, and I walk over the window to go and look. Standing, perched on top of this tree, is what I thought was a large bat at first, but the more I looked, even at that age, I just knew it wasn't right. Something was so wrong about it. The way it looked, the way it moved just seemed unnatural. The way it furled its wings inward. Then, it immediately looked over in my direction, as if it knew I was watching it. I remember kind of just gasping and stepping back. This thing immediately darts down to the ground and kind of vanishes into a small sect of trees. Completely startled by this, I get dressed fully, go downstairs, and tell my mom what I just saw. She, of course, being a mom, simply dismisses any claims I would have had and just says, "Oh, honey, you probably saw an owl or a bird. Nothing to be alarmed of." But I wasn't buying her explanation. Even though I was 8 or 9, I wasn't stupid. I knew what an owl or bird looked like, and my mom trying to cheaply explain it away wasn't doing it justice. So, a couple of days later, I was very close with my grandfather at the time, so I brought my encounter story to him. He believed me. Oh yes. As a matter of fact, he's seen the Mothman too, multiple times, even going as far back as being a young boy before the infamous grouping of sightings back in the 60s. He tells me that these things, that there's not just one of them, but there's several of them. They hang around the area and they mainly stay in the woods, and to mainly try and just stay out of the woods at night if you can. But I told him I wasn't in the woods, I was in the house. And he responded by telling me that even though I wasn't in the woods when this happened, we're close by, and to just try my best to stay away from not only wooded areas, but any areas around wooded areas, just to try and stay safe. There's no telling what these things are capable of, and if anything, they're probably extremely dangerous. Alright, now let me tell you a bit about my second encounter. For this one, we fast forward in time about 10 or so years. I was now 19 years old and had a part-time job working at a lumber mill. Because of where we lived at the time, we were a little bit ways out of town, and this lumber mill was roughly 6 miles away from my house. To get there, you had to take a lot of back roads, which meant coming back at night, I had to be very cautious of deer. I mean, the area was full of black-tailed deer, constantly having times where they'd jump out in front of your car. So, naturally, it being nighttime and with that in mind, I was always on very high alert. So I'm driving home, it's dark, it's maybe sometime in the spring or fall. I can't remember which, but it was roughly 7 or 8 p.m. Like I said, it was dark, and I'm driving these roads, and I come to a fork in the road. I make a right turn to lead back to my house. Now, I'm maybe 3 miles away, and as I'm coming down the straight road, this figure I see is standing right in the middle of the road. And as I'm pulling up to it, I'm thinking to myself, who's standing in the road? But things begin to get a little bit more unnerving. The closer I get, the more closer my headlights start to illuminate this figure. And like normal, if it was a person, the headlights would start to reveal details of the person. You know, like what they looked like, their clothing, etc. The only problem here is, the more the lights hit this thing, nothing showed. It was just pitch black, like there were no details at all, as if it was some formulated physical cloud of black smoke, is how I can best describe it. So I'm getting closer and closer to this thing, and just trying to rationalize and make out what I'm looking at. You know, I couldn't tell you the exact second that my brain just had that aha moment, where it clicked that I had seen enough of this thing to fully have that flashback memory of the same thing I saw 10 years prior, and immediately, that recognition was horrific. This thing opened its wings, revealing the same 2 eyes that I saw when I was 8 or 9, and I knew instantly, this is the same creature. I want to say I thought about it and made a very intelligent reaction, but what I recall is my body just reacting to the sighting, and I slam on my brakes, no more than 50 feet away from this thing, contesting my driving further down the road. And without even thinking the thought, I throw my car into reverse, do a quick 180, and I'm zooming in the opposite direction, not even caring to check my rearview mirrors. In that moment in time, my only motive was to make as much distance between me and this thing as possible. Yeah, I took the long way home, which took an extra 20-25 minutes, but it was worth it. I never did tell my mother or my grandfather at that point what I saw. Not this point. Now, fast forward another few years, and I'm about 23. I had finally saved up enough money to move out on my own and away and out of town. Well, since then, I've had a budding career, and fortunately for me, I have had 0 encounters, sightings, or experiences with this, what people I guess call the Mothman. But they do at least make interesting stories now that I've made peace with them. So I'm happy to share them with you. Use them as freely as you want. Just please keep my name out of this. Thanks. Hello. I am a private detective in Denton, Texas. I have a sighting I would like to share with you that took place back in August of 1999. I was sent to a residence in Denton County to do an investigation for a child custody case. I was sent there to do a check on the welfare of a person who was supposed to be living in the residence. I arrived at about 7 p.m. and went inside to make my investigation. While in the residence, I was startled by a noise coming from the back. I went to the back and found a 5-foot-tall creature with glowing red eyes in the backyard, and I observed as this thing climbed up a pine tree and flew off with what appeared to be large bat-like wings. It moved very fast and very gracefully, kind of like it just glided across the sky. It was incredibly unusual. Of course, I reached out to local law enforcement, but they said they get these reports more often than not, and there's nothing they could do. I'm not really the one to share and talk about paranormal sightings and happenings, but I have been a fan of your channel for a while now, and I figured that you might enjoy this little nugget. I have never really understood what it was, or why it was there, or what its purpose was. All I can say is that I guess I'm a part of the lucky club that actually has had the fortune, or depending on how you look at it, misfortune, of seeing something like this in person. This sighting occurred right around the summer of 2001. I was out in the woods with my boyfriend at the time, camping. It was a wonderful, peaceful night. Very clear. We were just sitting out looking at the stars together. It was about maybe 11 to 11:30 p.m. It was now getting pretty late. I had just finished telling my boyfriend that I was tired and was ready to check in for bed in the tent, when I noticed something moving quickly through the trees. I looked to my left and saw a being. Now, I don't know what it is, and I don't claim to know what it was, but I've never seen anything like it before. It was maybe 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, and had red eyes. I could not tell if it had wings or not, but it moved extremely fast and was very agile. I just remember thinking to myself, what is that? Could it be a bear? It had very long arms and was running on 2 legs. It ran by us so fast that I couldn't make out details on the face, but I can tell you, judging by its stature, size, the way it moved, it was impossible for it to be a human. I mean, it was so dark out there. Why would anybody be doing this? We were startled. At least I was. I told my boyfriend what I saw, and to come find out, he saw the same thing too. He just didn't want to say anything to me to scare me. He said he saw the same thing and that it was very fast, but, like he could only make out a faint silhouette. That was more than enough for him. I am 100% sure that what I saw was not human. I don't know what it was, and I have never seen a bear move like that before, assuming it is a bear. I've heard of things called a Mothman, but I don't know. It could also, I guess, be a Bigfoot, but I'm not really into Bigfoot, or the idea that one exists. In fact, the idea is silly to me, but I clearly can't deny what we experienced on this camping trip. Either way, I don't want to come to any conclusions just yet. I think I'd rather wait for your opinion. You tell me, what do you think I saw? As I was driving back home from work, and as I was almost home, I got off the exit for the street that I live on. As I slowed down at the off-ramp, I see these 2 huge red eyes catching my attention. I looked at it, and it looked at me. I sped away as quickly as I could. It was bigger than a man, and it had wings. It was black, and it didn't have a head. I usually don't believe the stories that people tell that this thing is the Mothman, but based on what I saw, how could I say no? I'm not sure if I could call myself a believer in Mothman, but I do believe in extraterrestrials. I've seen this with my own eyes, and I know for a fact it was real. The creature did not look like a human being. It did not look like anything that I've seen before. It came soaring out of the sky right at my car, and had I not slowed down, I probably would have hit it. I'll never forget what I saw. I'm kind of still in shock over it, honestly. I know the Mothman is something talked about and seen by so many of the locals, but I never in a million years could have imagined that I myself would see it. I've seen many strange things in my life, but this was the most bizarre thing I have ever seen. I can't explain it, but I know what I saw. I know it was real. It was no dream. I wish it was. I know many others see this thing too, so I know I'm not crazy. I was lying in bed at about 2 a.m. after staying up pretty late. That's when I noticed this very large shadow just outside my window. It immediately caught my attention. I live next to a really large lake out here in the woods, so I wasn't sure what it was. It was much larger than a deer, like I initially thought. I was convinced at first it was a deer, but then I noticed it was standing upright. So I opened my window further to see this huge black creature, which then I noticed it had a very large wingspan, and it was hovering over the lake. This thing looked to be bigger than a human, but its head was shaped kind of like a dome, like a large black moth. I only saw it for a few seconds, but even in the dark and the dim moonlight, I locked right onto it, noticing that it looked all sorts of wrong. This was something not of the natural world. And its eyes. There was something wrong with the eyes. They seemed to illuminate red, glowing this faint light. It was all black, pitch black, and it had long wings. It seemed to kind of sit there for a few seconds and then kind of shoot off in the distance, disappearing between the trees. I was convinced that maybe was this a Bigfoot, although I don't know anything about Bigfoot. Do Bigfoot have wings? Do they even live in the woods? I don't know. I didn't hear any other movement. I didn't smell anything. I didn't notice anything else that was strange. Just that sight. And for the record, from where I'm sitting in bed, if you look out the window, I have a perfect view of the lake, which, mind you, is only maybe 50 feet away from my bedroom. So, if there's any movement out there, I'm gonna see it. And the way the moon was positioned that night, right up in the right spot in the sky, gave me the perfect illumination of this being or object that was just hovering there. Look, I'm like you. I wish I could give you a proper explanation of what it was or what it could have been, but I really don't know. So, I've taken the time to write this encounter up and send it to several people. You, of course, being one of them, and the replies I'm getting back are a little unnerving. I guess somebody had mentioned something about a demon, while somebody else mentioned something about a Mothman. Now, I took the time to do some research before I send you an email, and come to find out, the Mothman is this, what they call a cryptid, and it normally exists in western Virginia, and I guess was even responsible for a ton of disasters around Point Pleasant. And while yeah, the concept is very interesting, I'm just not 100% sure I'm fully convinced yet. Although, I do believe and I know I saw something, but what that something was, I'm not too sure. So, in my search for the answer, I stumbled upon you. You seem to be the kingdom of encounters and stories, and hopefully knowledge that will solve this case. If you can't, well, I'm hoping you'll at least read this and maybe your viewers will be able to crack the case. And maybe, if I'm lucky, you'll put this up online and I can read people's comments. That's if you choose to read this. Anyhow, in closing, I appreciate your efforts and any responses you give. Thank you for your time. My dad and I were coming back from a family reunion in Tennessee, and we decided to go to some places that had made him the happiest as a child. Seeing as how our family had moved from that area before, he was far old enough to really remember them. We arrived at one specific location, and we noticed a famous stream that he would always talk about as a kid that he loved to go and fish at, play, and just be a kid, had been replaced by a small highway. So we drove around a little while longer, searching for other areas. We found another good one, a little place that he liked to hang out as a teenager. This area was now full of discarded cans and garbage. It wasn't all that great. As we're kind of looking around this area, further back, there were trails that he would usually hike down, and being a teenager, was full of debauchery. He's motioning for me to continue down this trail that led just a little bit deeper into the woods. Now, keep in mind, at this point, a lot of the surrounding wilderness had been turned to highway, and much of the surrounding swamps were now being used for development, not like they were back in the 80s. Now, the surrounding woods we were entering were very thick, very dense. It even kind of cut off light the further in you went. And, I don't know exactly what it was at first. I guess I kind of just got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. Not anything specific, like what you tell in your stories where people get the feeling that they were being watched. Nothing like that. It was more just a gut instinct, like it's probably not safe to continue on further. In that moment, I assumed it was maybe because there might be dangerous homeless people around, or drug addicts, or what have you, since there did seem to be signs of homeless camps, what with all the garbage and cans and stuff, or worse. Now, out of the blue, my father stops dead in his tracks, sticks out his arm as if to stop me from walking further. And I look up at him, and he's staring right at something, and he has the most serious expression on his face. So I'm asking him, "Dad, what do you see? What's up?" And I look out to where he's looking. Well, directly in front of us was kind of this little marsh, I guess you can call it. There was a cement wall on the other side that led to a lone road. Well, on this concrete block, or concrete wall, I guess you can call it, was a medium-sized storm drain. And out of the storm drain was climbing this, what I'll describe to you as a lizard man. I feel silly for even typing that, but that's the only way how I know how to describe it. I mean, imagine a person in a lizard costume or something. Except the movements were so smooth that there's no way this would be somebody in a costume. All the way out here, it didn't really make any sense. We weren't exactly miles and miles out from town, but we also weren't in the middle of a metropolitan area either. And who in their right mind would be climbing out of a storm drain in that sort of costume? We saw it kind of climb its way out and climb down into the marsh. Luckily, we were kind of tucked away back in the trees enough where this creature or animal did not seem to notice us, but my father and I got a very good look at it. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of like a half-man, half-dinosaur sort of thing. The head was very much so reptilian-like. The body was covered in scales, and it had a man very much like a body. 2 arms, a chest, body, legs, all that stuff. Which is why I made the lizard man costume reference a paragraph ago. Once it climbed down out of the storm drain, it began walking off in the opposite direction, into the thick tree line where there's more dense, thicker swamps. It never turned to look in our direction, and never seemed to have noticed us. My dad, of course, his gaze was locked on this thing for the whole 20-30 seconds that we watched it disappear. I think him and I were in such shock and awe, but more so him. I kind of couldn't believe my eyes, but he seemed to have this look on his face that just screamed danger. After this thing disappeared into the thicket of the trees, he finally broke his gaze and looked at me and just said, "We should leave, now." I wasn't going to challenge that. I didn't ask any questions, so we quickly headed on back up the trail, maybe no more than a half a mile, up to the original spot that had all those discarded cans and garbage, made our way back further, and got to the car. After some time, I was the one to finally break the silence and ask, "Dad, what did we see out there? I mean, we both saw it, right? Is that some sort of unidentified animal or maybe undiscovered species?" He remained quiet and just looked at me with a very cold stare and said, "I don't know, son, but I didn't like it." I mean, I know it's a very anticlimactic ending to my encounter, but that's really all that was said. And my father and I have not talked about it since. I mean, I don't really see much of a reason to, but I thought in recent events with the world, I would maybe try and find some time, now that I had off, to reach out to different paranormal investigators and even story narrators, which is why I'm kind of drawn to your work and your channel. So I thought I would shoot you an email. And hey, worst comes to worst, I don't get a response. And best comes to best, you read my story and your audience can help me out, since it appears they've helped out so many others. Best of luck and thank you so much. It was at nighttime, and I was driving along Highway 24, right around the area of this old mill house. This is when I stopped at a stop sign, and I see something large coming out of the tall field grass. At first, I assumed it was maybe a deer, but then I saw it was clearly no deer. The creature I saw, well, I can't identify it. I can tell you this though. It was a behemoth of a thing. Maybe 800 pounds, and I'm not exaggerating. And its body was large and very serpentine-like, or snake-like, I should say. The head alone was maybe 2 or 3 feet large. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. This thing was massive, and it just seemed to kind of rise up out of the grass so calmly. It got about 10 feet away from my car and just glanced on by, as if me being there wasn't a big deal at all. In fact, it really didn't pay any attention to me. Like, it could have cared less that I even saw this thing. And as you can imagine, seeing something like this for the first time, especially at night, feeling extremely vulnerable, having no weapons, nothing, I was terrified out of my mind. This giant human reptile thing walking around with 2 red eyes. Part of me wanted to just stick in my disbelief. This creature checked off every box in a horror movie cliche, but at the same time, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. Its gait, its movement. You could see its muscles and skin. I mean, either this was somebody in the most convincing Hollywood monster costume I have ever seen and that's ever been made, or this was something truly out of this world. What's your opinion? This story takes place back in 2014. I was in a 2-story house with my brother, kind of out in the backwoods of Missouri. He and his band rented this house out collectively for rehearsal. It wasn't an out of town too far, but you had to drive maybe about 10-15 minutes to get to it. And being a good brother that he is, allowed me to stay in the upper 2-story part, which is just one big open room, which I used for my bedroom for a couple of weeks after getting out of a very toxic relationship. So, very early on in the morning, I'd say 3 or 4, I was having trouble sleeping, and I'm out there on the balcony looking down just at the woods and the surrounding area, lost in thought, and I suddenly see a huge, maybe 6-7 foot tall dark figure darting across the tree line. It caught my attention, and I thought it was an animal at first, until I looked. That's when I could see the figure much more clearly, because it moved. What I was looking at was a large bipedal animal, and believe it or not, it kind of resembled a cross between a gorilla, a lizard, and a human. Although I couldn't see every enunciation of detail. It was very dark in color. Not just its coloring, but the lighting as well. Its head was huge. It had big long arms, and its body was also large too. The head, though, was more elongated, and, like I stated, easily 6 to 7 feet tall. The only reason that I even saw this thing was because it was a full moon that night, but where the moon was positioned and angled in the sky did not, unfortunately, light up this thing so I can get a look at it. It was in fact on the other area of the sky, giving just enough light that I could see something was here, but not all the details that I wanted. I know it might sound kind of morbid, but I was kind of wanting to see what this thing looked like, only because it was so unique, I guess. It stood there in the tree line for maybe, 10-15 seconds, and then kind of disappeared deeper into the woods. I was the only person at the house at the time, and I actually wasn't that creeped out. While it was slightly disturbing, I kind of just wrote it off as maybe the darkness playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe the stress and emotional baggage from the bad relationship was causing me to see things that weren't exactly there. I slept on it, and after getting up the next morning, I realized last night was indeed not just stress, but I actually saw something. I've always been a believer in monsters and animals we might not be able to explain, and I've even seen some strange things in my life. But this, my friend, was definitely the strangest I had hands down ever seen. I was on this big adventurous hike to a lake with my friends. We had to walk through at least a couple of miles of woods from where we parked to get to said lake. And for the sake of the story, I'm going to keep the name of the lake anonymous, but I can tell you that it was a very popular lake. Still is. And since I was leading me and my few friends, I was, of course, in front. And as we're walking through the woods to get to said lake, I noticed something weird. I saw this big shadow, and I looked at it, trying to figure out what it was. I noticed it was kind of watching us from in between some trees, and it stayed perfectly still, so that's why I didn't exactly catch it at first. My first inkling was that it was maybe a man, but the more I looked at it, even with how dark it looked wrong. Now, before I go on, you might be thinking, oh, well, you just saw Bigfoot. But I'm telling you, Bigfoots don't look like this thing did. This had a much more reptile-like appearance. The head was very long. The arms were very long. It kind of reminded me of a serpent head on a human body, with scales and everything, but just dark. After looking at it, I stopped my friends and had them look too, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. As soon as we all stopped and began gawking at this thing, it immediately tilts its head up to look at us and starts jolting after us. We all start screaming and began running back the way we came. We could hear it chasing after us in the woods, and it caught up very quickly. I mean, it was probably no more than 30 yards away at max, and it was in a section of woods where it wasn't so thick we couldn't see it. It's like it was waiting there for somebody, for us. The thing chased after us though, and it was moving so fast, I didn't think it was possible. We didn't know what to do, so we ran and we ran, and we were able to ran back to where we had initially parked. I was so scared. I mean, all of us were. We were all looking at each other like, did that just happen? What was that? I'm not sure why, but I believe whatever this thing was could have caught up to us and grabbed us. But it didn't. It's like it wanted to chase us out for whatever reason. We were only maybe a half mile in the trail, and we all said that we could all hear it almost right behind us, right in the trees. I'm not sure why it never reached out and tried to grab any of us. That's kind of a mystery to me. So we all get in the car and we drive off, and we're trying to speculate what it was. What animal could it have been? A few of us talked and argued that it was a Bigfoot, but Bigfoots don't look like that. Not that I'm aware of, at least, unless I'm missing something. Yes, we were all terrified, but I strongly feel that this was something else entirely. I don't know if lizard men exist or snake men exist, but that's the closest thing I could even compare it to. It was my son and I, and a friend. We were out trout fishing at a local lake, not too far away from home base. It was a late summer evening, around maybe 9:30, just enough to where it was getting pretty dusky, but not quite dark yet. We were all sitting at the end of a dock fishing, and we had our dog, Jody, with us. He's a sweet boy, a Labrador retriever. We take him on all of our outings. At least we like to think he keeps us safe. He barks whenever there's a predator around, so he does a pretty good job of warning us and warding off any potential danger. And thanks to him, with this encounter, we saw what we did and potentially saved our lives. We're sitting there with our lines in the water, lost in conversation, and we hear Jody start barking and barking at something. I turn my attention, and I see he's barking at the water off to our left. Then I look a little closer, and I see the shape of something large coming up out of the lake. I motion to my friend and my son, and they all look in unison, and we're watching as Jody now begins to bark frantically, going crazy. And then out of the lake steps this horror. I don't even know how to describe it accurately in detail. It kind of reminded me of a half-man, half-alligator. Really ugly and grotesque looking, covered in scales and that thick armor plate that alligators are known for having. It just kind of ascends up out of the water, this elongated face, It turns and looks at us, stares at Jody, and casually walks off into the thicket that's right there, maybe no more than 10 feet from the water. As soon as it fully ascends out of the water and onto the shore, Jody begins whimpering and running back towards us, as he's terrified of whatever creature that is. My son, nearly soiling himself, was screaming, "Dad, Dad, what is that? What did we just see?" And my friend, of course, was silent, as was I. We couldn't really say much, but we all three agreed in unison, "Let's leave." I just didn't feel it was safe there anymore. On the drive back, we all kind of talked about it a little more and said, "Man, I don't know what that thing was, but as soon as we saw it, this feeling of we should leave now, it's not safe, just kind of took over all of us. I mean, had it not, I don't think we would have left. Something was wrong. What that something was, I don't know. Look, I am not an advocate for the strange and paranormal. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that, or even Bigfoot or strange creatures. But I can't explain this animal. I don't want to go so far as to say it was a lake monster. I feel like that's ridiculous, but I've never seen a reptilian that was bipedal, that also came out of the lake. That was a first for all of us." Let me just say this first and foremost. I'm not a conspiracy person. I don't own a tinfoil hat, metaphorically of course, and I'm a pretty rational, scientific-rooted person. But I have no way to explain away this experience that I had back in 1998. Let me tell you, I was just a sophomore in college, and I was working in a bar in a small town in southwestern Florida. It was a great place, frequented by locals, many of whom I knew and many of whom knew me. We had a lot of regular faces. It was a place where people could get beer and never have to worry about somebody making them feel uncomfortable or getting hit on or getting in a fight. At least, not while on my shifts. It was a fun place. At the time, I was the only girl working there. I was the bartender and the only female that served beer. So, I was the only female that had to work at the bar. The place was a small old building that had originally been a gas station, and years later was converted to the store, and then eventually became a bar. The bar was in the front, and the back of the building held the kitchen, a small office, and the bathrooms. So, enough about that. It was a Saturday night. I was working the bar all by myself, which I was accustomed to. I had worked by myself quite a bit, and I'm not gonna lie, I have never made as great as tips as I ever have in my life working that job. But tonight was pretty slow. The place only had a few customers, and I was chatting with a group of maybe 3 people who were sitting there at the bar. Just small talk, just joking around and having fun. I thought I was having a pretty good time until this particular man walked in. He walks up right to the bar and I turn around, cleaning a bar mug. I did not know this man. I'd never seen him before, but there was something interesting about what he wore and the way he looked. I did not know anybody else who knew him. In fact, I wasn't the only one startled by his presence. Everybody in that bar seemed to kind of have that Hollywood movie moment where the guy walks in and where everybody just stops and kind of stares with a blank expression. That's the perfect way to kind of captivate this moment. He sits down, never breaking a stare. I mean, he's a big guy, strong jawline, dark hair. He had a black shirt on and jeans and looked like he had just come from the gym. The thing that struck me the most, though, was his eyes. They were these incredibly dark eyes. Not like fully black or anything, but he just had really stark, contrasty eyes. They were almost hypnotizing, and not in a lustful, romantic way. It was almost like a trance, like he had this power. I know, it's a bizarre description, but that's what it was. He had this very intense look on his face, almost like he was waiting for somebody, me, to say something. So I kind of stood there without a word, just staring back at him, wondering who this guy was. After a little bit, maybe 10 seconds, I nervously just said, "Can I help you?" without him ever breaking his gaze. He just kept stare, smirked a little, and just said, "I think so." Now at this point, I was getting creeped out. His demeanor, his attitude, everything was just weird. I mean, I've worked here already for a while, and no guy has ever just came in here and looked at me like that, without saying anything. I didn't know what he wanted, and I did not know who he was. So, my response was, okay, what do you want?" He paused for a moment. Keep in mind, during this entire interaction, I don't even think I saw the man blink once, let alone break eye contact. It was the creepiest thing. He calmly just says, "I want you," in a very monotone. At this point, not only am I creeped out, but I'm confused. And in the moment and being nervous, I was like, I'm working, what do you want?" He smirked again and said, "I would like to buy you a drink, if you want one." I had to politely kind of shoot him down and say, "Well, I'm working, so I don't drink right now. But maybe if you stick around, you can buy me one later." So he said, "Okay." And he just sat there, looking at the menu. And so now I'm kicking myself for even saying that. Stupid, stupid. Why did I give him such an invitation? Oh gosh, I was a nervous wreck. The people sitting at the bar just kept staring back at me, staring back at him, staring at each other, exchanging glances of confusement and, "Oh boy, she's in trouble" kind of look. He sat there quiet, and I was busy cleaning and doing my job duties. Maybe 45 minutes goes by and he's still sitting there, staring at the menu. I think I asked him, "Have you thought about what you wanted yet?" And as he turns to look back up at me, here's the terrifying part. As he lifts his head up in response to my question, his eyes were not normal. There was something wrong with them. They looked like snake eyes or something. They were this dark green and had these huge black slits in them. And maybe like a half second later, no more than a second, it's almost like they turned normal again. Like the same way an alligator does. You know, how they have those secondary eyelids. It was like a blinking, but not with his actual eyelids. I kind of screamed when I saw it, and kind of flung myself back. He did that blinking thing and his eyes were normal again, just very dark. And he looked puzzled, but still very mono-expressive. Tilted his head very robotically and asked, "What's wrong?" I told him, "You need to get out of here now, or I'm calling the police." Then, without ever breaking eye contact, he slowly stands up, then turns his head and his body, and slowly goes to walk out the door. As he gets to the door, he stops as his hand touches the door, turns around, looks at me again, and says, "It's a shame. You would have made such a great addition." Then immediately turned around and walked out. That was the last I ever saw of him. My skin felt like it was crawling. I was so creeped out. The guys at the bar were like, "Who was that guy?" And I told them, "I don't know." Luckily, my regulars were very kind and nice to me and said, "Hey, we don't know who he was, but we all got the creeps. We'll stay here late if you'd like to close to protect you." I thought that was very kind, and I took all three guys up on the offer. And they stayed with me until my shift ended at around 1 or 2 in the morning, kept me company. The guy never reappeared. So that's my college story. Now, here's an important note. Fast forward almost 10 years to about 2009, and my aunt is very big, still is by the way, into the paranormal and things like conspiracy theories, reptilians, all that kind of stuff. Nothing that I really ever pay attention to. But I guess she was telling me there are these beings called reptilians. They apparently have the ability to shapeshift into people. I kind of laughed the notion off at first, and then she went on to show me some clips. People being caught on camera, like newscasters and TV hosts and celebrities, except their eyes change, and she showed me that. I felt my skin crawl again. That memory of that night instantly came back to me. That's exactly what I saw that night. I didn't tell my aunt anything. I mean, I always thought she was kind of crazy, but I just kind of shot her down and was like, yeah, that's terrifying. But I knew deep down, something was wrong with that man. I can't sit here and say with concrete evidence that was exactly the case, but the resemblance to the video she showed me, to what his eyes looked like and his strange odd behavior, sure is uncanny how close they're related. Hi, what lurks beneath? Before I tell you this, I trust you'll keep my name anonymous, and my location anonymous as well. And I also trust that you'll at least hear me out, and if I'm lucky, read my story. I know you're a busy man, and so I bet with all the stories you get, you probably don't have much time. Well, here's mine, and feel free to use it if you'd like. I lived in the swampy areas of Illinois for a very long time. I was deer hunting in the swamps, well, about 3 years ago now. This day in particular was very foggy, and I was busy walking along a path in the swamp. I heard a noise that was not something I'm used to hearing. It was like this very fast pitter-pattering, except the pitter-pattering was not that of light weight. These were heavy, more like thuds against the ground. I knew it was something because, again, I never heard anything like this before. Thinking maybe it was an alligator, I got down, crouching and listening for a moment. It was actually coming up in the trees around me, not on the ground. I'm thinking to myself, what the? And then I hear branches kind of breaking and moving up in the trees around me. So I get up from a crouched position, and I'm looking around. Instantly, as I turn behind me, I see these glowing pairs of eyes looking at me. This was during the day, mind you, so my visibility wasn't exactly poor. What I was looking at, I have no explanation for. It was just this big creature. It looked very dinosaur-like, if I can describe it. I had a hard time seeing the entirety of the thing, even though the light was good, because of how it was holding onto the tree. It was kind of crouched, on a large branch, actually, higher up in the trees. It had a pretty big head, and looked to be bigger and taller than I was. I didn't waste any time. I ran back to my truck, and I've never really sat down to tell anybody this before. But I know what I saw, and it was not a deer. What this thing was, I don't know. To me, it reminded me of some failed genetic experiment somebody tried to do by splicing human and dinosaur DNA. Sure, it sounds like a science fiction plot gone wrong, but that's what I saw. This was back in 2016. I was with my friend Josh on a run in the Pine Barrens in southern New Jersey. It was a cool autumn morning. The sun was out, and the leaves were just starting to change color. And it was the perfect morning for a run. We were running a trail, just for exercise and to get some good fresh air. A nice brisk pace always helps the body. And this particular trail was slightly challenging, with it being uphill. We were both talking about how nice it was out and how much we enjoyed being out here in the woods. So, here's a quick note, before I go any further with my story. Yes, I'm aware that Pine Barrens is home to all sorts of strange stories and encounters. Things like UFO sightings and bright lights, alien abductions, Bigfoots, and yes, even the Jersey Devil. I've heard it all. But I've never experienced anything myself. Never seen anything, never felt anything weird, and I've lived here for a long time. Not all my life, but enough time in the Pine Barrens, hiking and running around, that I feel like if those things were true, I would have seen something, at least by now. Well, that mentality that I had was proven wrong this day. As I was saying, we were running on this trail when, up ahead of us, we see something. Now bear in mind here, this is what we saw. We saw something big, climbing out of the ground. At first, we kind of stopped thinking, what is this? But it happened very fast. This large, lizard-like thing pulled itself out of the ground within a matter of seconds, like it just kind of dug itself out. Think of how in the movies where it shows, zombies digging themselves out of a grave and pulling themselves up. It was similar to that, but it was way faster. It was like a slick, solid motion of just arms out, body coming up out of the ground, boom. I feel like the phrase pooping bricks is a severe understatement to how Josh and I felt. We were frozen, as this being had pulled itself out of the ground, and its expression was kind of stunned and shocked that we were there, like it wasn't sure how to react to the fact that we had seen it. And we were kind of just locked in this stare for, I don't know, maybe 5 seconds, before Josh just grabs me and takes off going the opposite direction. My body reacted and we both ran as fast as we could. Somehow, we managed not to scream, and I'm really surprised I didn't scream like a little girl after seeing what we did. We get all the way back down the trail and get back to the parking lot, where we stop and try to catch our breath. After heaving and breathing heavily, maybe a minute goes by and we're finally able to breathe enough to where we can ask each other, "What was that? Did you see that? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh." And yeah, I can't believe we saw that. What was that? None of us knew. None of us could even think about what it could have been. Like I told you already, I have lived here for at least 10 plus years and have never even heard or seen of anything remotely like that. Let me give you a good description of what it was, since we had such a good view of it. This thing was a dark green, almost black, and it was covered in scales. It had a body similar to a man, but very large clawed hands and feet, and the head was almost kind of like a velociraptor, at least in shape. The eyes were a very contrasty yellow, very piercing, actually. We never saw any teeth, but I guess the best description, I would call it, is a dinosaur man, because it was like half man, half dinosaur, I guess. I also didn't see its teeth, but this thing was also ripped. I mean, through its scales, you could see its rippling muscles, all over its arms, all over its chest and stomach. I did not see any genitalia. It was not wearing any clothing or anything to cover that. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to go back in those woods to find out, if we're honest. In my early teens, my brother and I would always go out to the backwoods to hunt for treasure. We often implored the use of a metal detector. We found all sorts of cool but useless stuff in hindsight. Bottle caps, old knives, cans, forks, things like that. Nothing too exciting, but as a teenager, it was like striking gold. The adventure would usually start with us being out after dark, coming home muddy and exhausted. I mean, hey, it got us out into the woods and burned a lot of calories in the process. I guess this is why we always stayed in shape, which would come in handy for what would happen in this story. Let me just take a brief moment and explain the layout of the land. Our father owned a vast amount of acreage on the backside of our property. You had multiple creeks, and it kind of dipped down and you go further and further back. And then the land kind of goes up into a hill. Once you get to the top of this gradual slope, you could go back down again into a deeper section of valley that was all just forest upon forest. Now, during the fall season, my father would use these areas as hunting, and even had multiple deer stands set up all throughout there. My brother and I never really ventured that far out. I mean, we're talking hundreds of acres here. So we generally stayed within maybe a mile or two at most of our own house. Don't quote me on the distance thing though. I really have no way to verify that measurement. It's just from my recollection. So we often had this evening ritual. We'd be out there pretty much all day, playing and trying to look for stuff to hunt for treasure with, and of course, using our trusty metal detector. By about evening time, sometimes we would sit and relax, my brother and I, on top of the far back large hill, and just kind of hear the crickets slowly fade into the night and see the weather and sky change. It was always really peaceful. Sometimes, well, more often than not, we would actually see foxes and deer. I can't dismiss it that it was really cool. But there was one night that I feel for me and my brother, but I can't speak for him. It kind of changed things. So we had a fairly normal day of hunting for treasure, and again, I don't believe we found anything extraordinary, at least not that I can recall. We were doing our usual of sitting atop this large hill, looking out into the night valley, or should I say almost night. That's when we started to hear sounds from the hill below us, something big moving around. My brother was the first one to hear it, as it got his attention first. He starts looking in that direction and knocks me on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, listen." And you could hear something big moving around. We thought it might be a buck or something, just due to the amount of noise it was making. But you could hear it was moving. And you could hear it wasn't walking, like the way a deer would. It was two-legged, whatever it was. And so now we're both really curious, trying to look through the trees and see if we can see anything. But we don't see anything. At this point, in the sky, it's pretty dusk. It's not totally black out yet, but it's getting dark. And my brother and I were never afraid of walking back to the house at night, since we knew this part from the hill back to our house pretty well, and we were pretty hardy teenagers. We just kept thinking, there's no way somebody's back here. I mean, the only way to access it is you'd have to go all the way around, maybe another 40 or so acres in either direction. And quite frankly, if somebody was out here, they would have a lantern or some sort of flashlight. And there's really nothing out here. It's not hunting season. There's nothing of value. There's no reason why anybody should be back here. And the other thing is this movement sounded like it was coming from something very large, much bigger than just a man. All these thoughts are going through my head, and I'm sure my brother's at the same time. And we're looking, and we're looking. And then, my brother and I at the same time in unison see these red glowing eyes just appear down in the bottom of the hill, and they're moving up towards us. I believe again, my brother sees it first, and he hits me on the shoulder, and he says, "Look," and points. And we both see it. This figure, this tall figure is coming towards us with red eyes. I remember saying, "What is that?" And it gets closer and closer. And I think at this point, we were both so scared, we couldn't even get up to move. I know the natural instinct is to probably get up and run. But when you're that terrified, on a primal fear level, it's different. It grounds you in a way that you can't physically react like you're supposed to. It got closer and closer, till the shadows and darkness of the tree coverage became lighter and lighter, and we could start to make out what it was. It's almost like the lack of darkness allowed this thing to be illuminated by whatever little light there was supplied by the stars and the moon. My brother and I got a front row show to the horror of whatever this creature was, that certainly was far from anything human. And after seeing it with my own eyes, which I later verified with my brother in verbatim to make sure we saw the same thing, this looked like some sort of lizard alien thing. I'm not sure what else you'd call it, to be honest. But I can tell you, it had a flat face, slitted pupils, large red-yellow eyes, a very reptilian-shaped like head. It was very tall, not really built strong, full of muscles, like you would see in a bodybuilder, but more so very lanky in its torso and its arms and legs. And it had this large tail behind it. It was kind of like a large lizard man, I guess, if that's the best way to describe it. It never opened up its mouth, so I never saw any teeth. But I could tell that its face, like I said, was flat, and the nose had slits. It also never made any sounds, other than the crunching of leaves and coming up from the brush. It was maybe, I don't know, 50 feet away from us, when my brother, manages to jump up, grab me by the collar, and yank me and pull me. Somehow, like kick-starting a motor, that's all my legs needed in order to run back to the house. And at this point, it was dark. Maybe not pitch black, but darker. And the second we go running down the hill, back towards the slope up to our property, we can hear this thing now picking up its pace, chasing us, running behind us, and it's gaining quickly. Trust me, I did not look back. I know all about that. I was not going to risk that happen, and falling and tripping over a rock, and just being bait for whatever this thing was. Again, it never screamed or let any noise, just that it gave chase. We made it to the bottom of this hill, and the gradual slope back up to our house. I think it must have stopped either way, somewhere along before we hit the bottom, because afterwards we didn't see it anymore or hear it, and I really have no idea what it was. We'd made it back just in time. Our parents weren't home, and so I didn't want to tell them anything anyway. I talked to my brother, asked him, what do you think that was? Because we both saw the same thing. We're not crazy. We didn't just see stuff. We did not hallucinate. That thing was as real as flesh and blood can get. And it's safe to say we didn't sleep that much that night. As terrified as I was from the whole experience, I tried to think analytically. Like, okay, this is obviously some sort of large predatory animal, bipedal or not. Then I start thinking about the logistics. Well, there's a lot of food back there. Tons of deer, tons of bear and foxes, lots of food, lots of places to go undisturbed and hide. If there's anywhere there would be some sort of creature like this, that backside of the property is exactly where you would find one. Although, I'm sure that my father has maybe had sightings himself, but he would never tell us, I'm sure. We had gone back there since multiple times, and yes, even at dusk, but we never saw this thing again. You might call me either brave or stupid for going back there, especially at dark. But, you know, when you're a teenager, you think you're practically invincible, as we did. We felt that if we had a Bowie knife and the proper tools, we would be more equipped to handle a situation like that, which we kept on us all the time from that point forward, but never encountered it again, whatever it was. This is my very first encounter ever with something nefarious out in the wilderness. I was 17 at the time, and honestly, quite terrified of my surroundings. I had gone camping with my family, and unbeknownst to me, I would encounter something strange that night. See, while I was sleeping in my tent, my older brother, who I was sleeping next to, would wake me up in the middle of the night. I guess he had to go pee really bad. He was only 5 years older than me, and even though he was 16, I was kind of the braver younger brother. So I got up with him, accompanying him out maybe 50 feet into the forest, while he went and relieved himself. Our parents were fast asleep in the adjacent tent. As he was peeing, and I'm standing there just a little ways away from him, we hear something walking around in the woods right next to us. I had a flashlight with me. He had a cell phone light. We both shined it in that direction, but didn't see anything. Whatever. So he gets done, which felt like forever. The man had drinking like 4 or 5 bottles of water. We go back to bed, lay down in our tent, and we're just kind of talking how brothers do. We both hear the faint sound of our mom, except it's coming from the forest, and it sounds like her saying, "Hey, boys, come back here. I want to talk to you." And so my brother and I are just kind of looking at each other in complete disbelief, being like, "What? How is that our mom? Our mom was asleep in the tent right next to us. What?" And the voice keeps telling us to come here. Now we're both pretty freaked out because this voice is almost perfectly imitating our mother, Our dad is snoring, and our mom is also sound asleep. There's no way that whoever or whatever could be perfectly imitating our mother's voice. We kind of just sit there, huddling in fear, kind of scared crapless, to be honest. After maybe a couple of minutes, the noises stop entirely, and when they do, we notice the forest along with it is now quiet. No crickets, no wind, no howls, nothing. It's just dead silent. So I prod my older brother, "Hey, maybe we should go investigate." But he was basically like, "No way I'm going out there. Not after hearing that." I mean, he was genuinely scared, and I can't deny that I wasn't either. But I was also curious, and the little brother in me was like, I have to defend this family if he won't. So I decided to get up out of the tent and have a look around myself, with my older brother begging me not to go. I get out, shine my flashlight around, and of course I don't see anything, anywhere. So I decided to go walk over to where I had heard the noises initially, at least the voices. I saw nothing, no sign of anyone or anything the voices could be coming from. So I walked back to the tent, still scared. The forest was still silent, and I had no answers. I was no closer to finding out what or who had mimicked our mother so perfectly. So my brother and I just sat in the tent and talked, and eventually we fell asleep, both still scared. In the morning time, my parents seemed happy and chipper more than usual. They asked us, "Did you guys sleep well last night?" We slept exceptionally well. I told them, yeah, it was kind of a rough night for both of us. My brother and I did not mention to our mother that we had heard her voice off in the woods, and we knew at no point in the night did she ever get up to leave her tent. I mean, my mom wouldn't go and just pee in the woods. That's not her. There was actually a faculty bathroom, not even that far away. Maybe a 3-4 minute walk? So, if anything, that's where she would have went. And she pretty much never is a get up in the night type of person to go use the bathroom. Anyway, I can't help but wonder what it was out there that we encountered that was able to mimic the voice almost perfectly of my mother, deep in the woods, in the complete opposite direction of where my parents' tent were. Back in 2008, I had got into a nasty fight with my girlfriend. Long story short, she kicks me out of the car in the middle of nowhere at midnight and drove off, leaving me entirely by myself in the darkness of the desert. I had no choice but to just start walking, using only my phone as a flashlight in the dark. It gets extremely dark in the desert at nighttime, and I'm all alone, so I was a little freaked out. As I'm just walking along on this road, all by myself, I hear something towards me. I stopped, and it was quiet. I shone my light around and began listening, but I didn't hear anything. I started walking again, and again. It kept getting closer and closer. Now, I was starting to get nervous and scared because something was coming for me. I started running now, and can hear something begin running after me in the darkness. It was really coming for me. I was sprinting as fast as I could down this road. I tripped and fell to the ground. The noise stopped, and I lay there for a minute, trying to catch my breath, while I could hear what was coming after me had stopped. I scrambled to my feet, shining my light all around, and I couldn't see a thing. Then I heard something snarling, just beyond the light reach of my phone. I stood there, frozen in fear for a few seconds, in the dark, only hearing this thing snarling at me. It was probably about a few feet from me. I panicked, shined my phone at it, and for the first time, I saw it. It was a coyote. But it was all wrong. It appeared ugly and disfigured and looked evil. I was so scared I just ran and did not stop running down the road in the dark, hearing this thing running behind me, getting closer and closer. I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. Then, just right over the horizon, I see the headlights of a car coming in my direction. I began waving my hands and jumping up and down. I was so happy to see this car. Then, as it got closer, I saw that it was my girlfriend. I could see that it was her. She slowed down and stopped right in front of me. She looks at me like I was crazy and asked what was wrong. In a sneer, she asks, "Scared of the night?" and demanded I get in the car now. She could see I was spooked and just made fun of me on the drive back about how she thought I was going to be such a wimp about it. I told her what had happened, what had chased me. She didn't believe me. I just wanted to go home and sleep. I never really told anyone else about it. I was scared they'd think I was crazy too, but it was pretty terrifying. She thought I was just trying to make her feel guilty, which was not the case. Even what she did was wrong, though. After that night, our relationship kind of crumbled, and not just because of this isolated incident. There were other things building up to it. She wasn't really the nicest of persons, and something like what happened that night just kind of sealed the deal. The next day, though, she tried to convince me it was just my imagination, and I really needed to grow up. I explained that there was this coyote thing chasing me, and even though it was a coyote, it wasn't. It looked all wrong. Anyway, I'm sorry if my story is dumb or anything, but I'm telling you, that was the scariest experience I have ever had in the night out in the desert. I've never been an experienced outdoors person, and I made the mistake one summer to go camping by myself when I encountered something I was not prepared for. I always knew I should have never gone camping alone, but I did it anyway, like I was trying to prove something. I made a major mistake, of course, being a rookie and being so nervous about it. I forgot one crucial thing: shelter. I packed my backpack with enough food and water, but I forgot my sleeping bag. I didn't want to turn around and call my friend, telling them I was too scared to camp. So I just decided I would just find some leaves and make a makeshift bed. I did have a small tent, so I guess I did have shelter after all, but I needed to do something. So, getting nervous and trying to calm myself down about what I was going to do in this strange predicament, I decided meditation would be my best takeaway. So, I found a nice spot and sat down for a while and tried meditating. I had come all this way and made all this time sacrificed. I was not going to give up now. This was a nice spot near a large lake. I had a beautiful view and a nice breeze. It was making things a little easier for me. I thought this would be the perfect place to meditate. I sat down, closed my eyes, and opened them, and started to meditate again. Just as I had my eyes closed, and I was really focusing in, a very loud crackling sound comes from the woods. This is where the story kind of changes. So I opened my eyes and looked around. I couldn't believe what I saw. Not even 30 feet away from me was this huge black bear. So I sat there frozen, tried to meditate again. I mean, I had no other option. I felt if, like, I were to get up and run away, this thing would have chased me and eaten me. I could feel my heart beating really fast. I thought if I just sat quietly, maybe it would go away. But I was wrong. The bear kept coming closer and closer, and it was making these strange noises, like huffing and groaning. I began to pray to God that it wouldn't come any closer, and I would be okay. I knew if the bear got closer, I would probably have to fight it off with my hands or something, which I knew was not a reality. This bear waltzes right up to me. It begins sniffing me, acting very strange. I stay as still as possible, not knowing exactly what to do. I'm sitting there, squeezing my eyes shut, not exactly sure what's going to happen next. And then, this bear just stops, stands up. I swear to you, this next part is real. I know it's common for bears to stand up on their hind legs, but this thing was standing different than a bear usually does. It was standing more like a man does, and even began chanting, as I recall. The bear began chanting, and I swear to you, I heard a voice say this aloud. It was almost telepathic, because the voice appeared in my head, not audibly. I heard the voice say this: "It's not what you think it is." I heard that loud and clear, and I opened my eyes again, and I saw this bear transform into a man, standing there almost like a statue. Now I'm terrified, and in front of me I'm seeing this person, what looks to be exactly like an old Native American man, covered in a large bear headdress with large animal skin draped over him, staring at me. This is all happening really, really fast, and I just don't know what to do. This person or thing just stands there, and I'm frozen in fear, not knowing what I should do. I don't know if it's a dream or what at this point, but I know I'm not dreaming. I know I'm awake. The next thing I know, this thing or person is chanting again, this time louder, and I swear, I hear the voice say again, "You have to go." And I had this vision of myself walking off into the woods, and suddenly I'm back in my tent. I don't know how I got there, but I'm actually in a sleeping bag this time, and I see a big sunbeam coming through the tent. I'm sitting up and it was morning time. Somehow, I don't know if I arrived in an alternate reality or what, because somehow I have a sleeping bag when I didn't bring one before. I was completely confused at how it was morning time, early morning, when I was meditating in around the mid to late evening. But all I knew was that I was alive. I didn't know what happened, but I knew I was very lucky. So, taking my chances, I packed up my tent and left. I can't even begin to describe to you just how freaky the entire thing was. I've never been one to hallucinate or just make up stories. Everything I'm telling you is true. I felt that I was very lucky to be alive. I don't know why I was spared. Maybe it was to tell this story. I don't know. I know that I will never go camping again by myself. I used to think it was just a coincidence, that I was attacked by a bear and that it was just some animal trying to protect its territory. Now, I believe that I was spared because it was maybe an omen. The Native Americans believed that there were these spirits that lived in the woods. They called them shapeshifters. I believe that that is what I encountered, and that it was some sort of shape-shifting spirit in the form of a physical, large black bear. Why it came up to me, though, and targeted me, I'll probably never know. One time, while out by a large river that runs by my cousin's house in Ohio, I saw a strange figure moving quickly through the woods. It was like a large black panther that was walking on two legs. It had the same body shape and size of what you'd see as a large black panther. It had no tail, and I could not see any ears. I watched it for a few moments as it moved quickly and swiftly through the woods. I could not see any eyes or discern any hair. I was so shocked that I could not move at first. I was afraid if I moved, it would see me. I was afraid it would come toward me, actually. It sure was strange looking. As it moved away from the river, it turned to the right and walked up a large hill toward a back road. I watched it all the way until it was completely out of sight. I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like that before. I believed I was seeing an alien. I think this because I have seen flying saucers in the sky. I also think I know what I saw because, well, I have seen a lot of strange things in my life. I've seen things that can't be explained. I saw something in the sky about maybe 7 months ago. My son and his girlfriend and I were sitting under a large tree in my backyard. I quickly saw a flash of light in the sky. It was maybe the size of a dime, and it was a flash of light that was so bright, I could not see anything else. The light was so bright, though, that it actually hurt my eyes. I was afraid to look up at it. I could not see anything else. I think what I saw was a flying saucer. I think this because the light was so bright and fast. But I have seen other things in the sky that I cannot explain. I have seen them when I was a child, and being born in 1942, I've been seeing strange things as long as I can remember. But the weirdest part about the whole Black Panther creature experience was that it appeared to have a skull-like head. Almost kind of reminded me of a skull head covering that some Native Americans used to wear back long, long ago. That's what it reminded me of. I've been out in the woods here and there my whole life, and I've not seen anything like that till this sighting. And call me what you will, but the thought of it alone still spooks me. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and have lived in the Kansas City area my entire life. Moved out here to Ohio about 10 years ago. In the mid-60s, I saw what I thought was a UFO while I was driving home from work at night. I was on the highway just about 2 miles south of the KCI airport. I was on the frontage road when I saw the object. There was a very large glowing oval-shaped object, and it was going from horizon to horizon very fast. It was so large that it took up the entirety of the road, and it was kind of a glowing reddish color. I thought it was going to hit the ground, and I was going about 60 miles an hour, and it was moving very fast. So I stopped the car to watch it, and I could still see it, as if it were moving sideways. It was going so fast that it was still there when it went over the horizon. It was like it went over the horizon in about 3 seconds. I could not see anything else in the sky when I saw this. No stars and no other lights. It was so large, I figured it must have been something out of this world. I've never seen anything like that before. What's weird is I've heard some other people in the area talk about UFO stuff, and then shortly after, mention seeing these large shadows of people or creatures with horns on their head. Skeletal heads, actually, that are reminiscent of Native American culture. The whole thing is very interesting, and I wonder if there's any correlation between the two. The following is from a man from the town of Newbury, Ohio. This town is located about 60 miles from where I live, and I have lived here all my life. The man tells of a strange event that took place back in the 60s. In the 1960s, there was a family of 4 that lived in Newbury. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Oxton, and their 2 children, a boy and a girl. The household was rather strange in the fact that George and Ruth Ann were kind of odd, both very religious, not in the sense of being a strict religious family though, but they were very good, non-judgmental people. They appeared to be very nice. George and Ruth Ann were both in their late 30s, and their children were both in their teens. The boy's name was George Jr., and he was your very typical teenager, but also very shy and reserved, while the daughter was a very sweet girl and very intelligent. She was in her senior year of high school and was the older sister at the time of this strange event. One evening, George Jr. and his mother were sitting in the kitchen talking, and listening to the radio. The radio that was in the kitchen was rather old and was on the fritz. It would turn on and off by itself, and you would have to turn it off and on again to get it to work. The radio was on, and George Jr.'s dad was in his bedroom in the back of the kitchen. George Jr. and his mother were sitting in the kitchen. George Jr. was leaning against the kitchen table, facing the door when the radio turned off. He looked up out of reaction and saw his mother suddenly looking up at the ceiling. He looks up and sees a strange shadow passing over them. It looked like a man with hands on his face, looking down at them, but it also resembled a wolf spirit, very native in appearance. It was very dark and looked like the shadow of a man covered in animal skins, not anything that was transparent. He said it passed over them very quickly, almost like a dark cloud passing over the sun. He said he was so scared that he ran out of the kitchen and ran up to his room. He said he stayed in his room for a long time after and never told anybody, and his mom would just never say a word about it. In the morning, George Jr. was getting ready for school, and his sister was just getting up. His sister told him that she had seen the strangest thing that morning. She said that she was in the bathroom brushing her hair when she looks up at the ceiling and sees this Native American man standing there, a Native American spirit. She said that it was so creepy, she screamed and ran out of the bathroom. She told her brother that it was the same figure that he saw in the kitchen the night before. George Jr. and his sister both later told their parents what they had seen, and they all thought it was a very strange occurrence. Perhaps this incident was caused by a skinwalker spirit, or maybe a shapeshifter. I don't know, but I have to wonder. Well, as it turns out, within 100 yards of their house, years and years and years back, there was a large mass grave pit that was dug to throw the bodies of Native Americans in, once being slaughtered by the invading Western Europeans after a very small-scale skirmish had taken place over territory. At least 30 Native American soldiers were shot and killed, and their bodies thrown into a mass-dug grave and buried right there near that house. Is there a connection here? I lived out in the backcountry for many years, until I moved closer to the city. I've seen some things out there, things that would just creep you out. The scariest, though, was when I'm pretty sure we had this strange creature come onto our property. I'm pretty sure it was a skinwalker of some kind. I just remember hearing this weird howl in the night, and then we'd start seeing these big paw prints all along the ground. I remember my dad and I did have a big argument about it. He said that this creature never really came onto our property because it was scared of us since we lived there. I think he was just trying to pacify our overactive imagination. I told him, though, I thought it was a skinwalker, and that it could come and go as it pleases, since these beings possess so much black magic and raw power. It's scary. I think it was stalking me and my sister at one point or another, and I swear, I saw it. It was tall and skinny, and even had long claws at the end of its hand. It reminded me of a wolf that walks on two legs, but it looked like it was starving and frail. Had missing flesh all around its head, too. I don't know if I believed in skinwalker stories, but I do believe in them now, and other creatures. I've also read about them, and I've seen things too. Not just this skinwalker stuff. I know this sounds crazy. My dad ended up getting rid of the creature by using sage and driving it away for the time being. He still doesn't believe it was a skinwalker, but believes it was something. I'm not sure what, though. It did not come back for a long time after that. I think it was gone for at least the rest of that year, until the following summertime when my dad got rid of it again with sage. But luckily, I had already moved away to Arizona for a while, and then back to Utah. That's also right around when I heard about a Wendigo. I've never seen anything myself, but I do believe after my experiences that they could be out here. I've heard some very strange stories of how these things like to eat, and they like to eat people, especially. I don't know if any of this is true, but I just wanted to share my story with you. I know it's not the scariest, but it is true. But I do have some questions about some of these other beings. I'm sure the Wendigo is real, just like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. I just don't think they're as terrifying as people make them out to be. I think people maybe just have their own imagination, and they don't know what else to think of these beings. I do think, though, that if a Wendigo does exist, it probably doesn't eat people. I'm sure they just eat other animals, and I don't think they're as bad as people might make them out to be. But I guess I can never be too sure, because, after all, I can't imagine running into one of these things myself. I've never seen anything myself either. I'm sure I might be seeing my share of these, though. I'm planning on going on a camping trip this year, and I'm sure I'll see some Wendigos on that trip, if I'm lucky. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but before I end this email, I did hear a Wendigo story once. It goes something like this. There was a man who was out in the woods hunting, and he was looking for some food. He was getting pretty hungry and needed to eat. He was thinking of how he couldn't find any animals to kill for food. So he was thinking of what he could eat to quench his hunger. He was getting pretty desperate, as time and hours and days drew on. And now, he was thinking of how he'd eat anything. He wasn't finding anything out there, though. Not even a squirrel. He was getting so desperate to find food. But then I guess he finds some berries on the ground and begins to eat them. They were somewhat poisonous, I guess, but he didn't care. He just wanted to eat. He then notices a deer carcass laying on the ground. He didn't know what was going on, but figured the deer had probably died of natural causes. It did not have any visible or noticeable wounds, so he ate some of it raw. He figured that he was going to be sick, but he wasn't. He didn't feel sick at all. He actually felt pretty good. He felt stronger. He was thinking that this was amazing and he was actually able to eat this dead deer meat without feeling guilty. He was thinking that this was better than eating meat from an animal that he had killed. Easier to do so. He was feeling pretty good, strong and energized. He felt like he could do anything, like he had a superpower. There was something to that dead deer that apparently had changed him. It turns out, it wasn't just a dead deer carcass he had found. This dead deer supposedly had a hex cast over it by a skinwalker witch that caused him to eat and gorge himself on the corpse of the deer like some rabid wild animal. The man soon ended up turning insane, ripping off his clothes, growing longer limbs, longer teeth and claws, and not long later, he became what's known as a Wendigo. Of course, it's just a story that I'd heard before growing up. But it does make you wonder, though, because stories have to come from somewhere. I think sometimes there might be truth to it, but maybe not to the extent the story makes it sound. Anyway, I've noticed that you're pretty good at telling stories, and I'm pretty sure that you know a lot about some of these creatures out there. I know that you know a lot about the Wendigo. I've heard some of the stories about these things that you've posted. I've also heard about skinwalkers, minus my own experience, but just from your channel, I firmly believe they exist. I know they're out there, and I know you of course have heard of them. So before I end this, I just wanted to ask you some questions. Could you please answer? Do you believe in the Wendigo? Do you think Wendigos are real? Have you ever seen one? I've heard that Wendigos are like shapeshifters. I've also heard they can mimic people, like they could be somebody that you know or see them around. I've heard they could also be a person that you're even friends with, maybe even a family member. They can disguise themselves as anything and everything. They can, just like a skinwalker, can shapeshift and transform into these cannibalistic beings. Anyhow, I'd love to hear back from you, and know what you think about skinwalkers and wendigos and how the two relate. Just so you know, I'm a creature magnet. I'm serious. I've had a large handful of creature sightings all throughout my life, multiple times as a child, run-ins with Bigfoot, you name it. And I think this specific day that I encountered what I believe was a skinwalker. Forgive me if this ends up being a garbled mess, but I'm going to try and do my best to accurately portray these. Probably one of the stranger things I've ever had to deal with was when I was out on my deer stand one evening, and I saw this strange being that I could not identify what it was. I couldn't really see much of its features due to how dark it was, but there was enough light that I could tell it faintly had arms out in front of it, in a very hostile position. At least the stance it was in was. I had my rifle with me, and no idea what I was dealing with exactly, other than knowing it was not a person. I thought it might be a Bigfoot, so I was going to shoot it. I aimed at it with my rifle, took one deep breath, and then BAM! Fired off a shot. I hear this thing let out this terrible scream like I've never heard before, and took off running into the woods. I was pretty scared for a little bit because I didn't know if it was injured or what, so I immediately packed up and went inside. Didn't go back out for my stand for a couple of days. Now, real quick, before you jump on me for thinking I'm crazy for shooting something I don't know what, let me tell you that when you get a distinct feeling in the pit of your gut, like this thing is out to hurt you, or that there is something very wrong, you just know it. I trusted my instinct. I knew deep down that this was not a person or a deer. I knew I was dealing with something else entirely. Trust me on this one. I've had a few run-ins with Bigfoot myself, and even though those have all been fairly peaceful, I know there are things that go bump in the night. This thing, though, I can just tell its intent was not good. And I've seen some weird stuff in the woods before, but I think the most bizarre thing I've ever seen was this creature that I could not identify. Although, all the creatures I've ever seen, I could not identify. I don't know what this was or where it came from, but I can tell you with certainty, I know it was not a Bigfoot or a deer. It did not sound or look like any of the two. The closest comparison I can make for you is in the game Skyrim, which I used to play religiously years back. There are these creatures called hag ravens. They are half bird and half witch. Something like that, but these creatures in the game have talon-like claws in their hands. The creatures in that game are similar to what I saw, but not completely accurate. It looked more like a deer, but it had that same hunched-over stance position, and the same thing with its clawed hands stretched out. But honestly, I don't know what it was. I do know that it was not normal. And again, I've had many strange encounters in my life. This next one I'll share with you is what I believe to be a skinwalker as well. And I'm not sure if this was real or just a dream, but it happened when I was 12. Me and my family would always go fishing down by the creek, close to a campsite that we had frequently visited. It was a really nice little spot down there with a small fishing hole. I remember it was a very hot day this day, so we decided to go wade into the creek, swim around a bit and cool off. We were all in there cooling off, and my brother, my sister and I, and my dad and my mom. I remember I was wading in the creek with my dad when I looked up and saw some weird creature standing on the edge of the water, looking at us on the side with the trees. I remember it being this ugly, zombie-looking deer creature thing, tall and brownish in color, with long arms and claws and dead, dangly flesh and mangy-like skin, and it had some kind of weird elephant-like tail. It was just swaying back and forth, like it was thinking, plotting. Now, this creature looked completely different than the one in my tree stand story, and any of the other creatures I had seen. This one reminded me specifically of a cross between a man, a deer, and a zombie, I guess. Anyway, I don't know how I knew this, but I could just tell this thing was malevolent. It was staring at us, but I didn't think it was going to attack. It appeared to be plotting and strategizing. At least that was the gist I got. Like it was constructing its mind on how it was going to hurt or kill us. I don't know how to really explain it. I just knew deep down it was dangerous. I remember I looked up at my dad and told him to look, but he didn't. It's like he couldn't see it. Then, I remember we all began to wade out of the creek and walked back up to camp. That thing followed us, just standing there on the edge of the creek of the path that we were walking. It was watching us. I remember we all walked back up to our campsite, and I just had this sense that something was going to happen. I don't know why I felt that way. Fast forward a bit, and I remember that night, me and my family went to sleep in our tents. I woke up in the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I look up, shine my light, and see the silhouette of that thing standing just outside my tent. But it was just standing there, staring. It had its arms stretched out, like it was reaching for my tent. Then it stopped, as if I had caught it, and it froze. Then it just casually lowers its arms and walks off. I don't know why I saw it. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a dream, but it was so vivid. I still remember it happening to this day. I don't know. It was just one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. Extremely scary, though. I just don't know for real if it was actually there. Maybe it was a really vivid dream. Like I told you, I've had quite a few strange experiences that are hard to describe. Most of them have been in the form of just weird, unexplained noises that I've heard out in the woods, or even strange shapes and things moving about. I've had some other weird things happen, but I'll only share a handful more with you, just for the sake of keeping this email from getting to a novel. This one is probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. I was with my brother, and I believe this time we were four-wheeling. I remember, we were on this long trail when we see a strange creature standing in the distance. This one looked like a wolf, but it was different in color. It was very light, almost like a white wolf would be. But it was totally hard to see in the distance. But my brother and I were getting closer, and were both looking at it. We couldn't quite make out what it was. We were driving along the trail, and the more we got to it, the closer we got. We could tell it was standing on its hind legs, and it had this weird coloring to it. It was very light brown. It was strange. It was just standing there looking at us. I remember my brother and I thinking to ourselves, what is that thing? It was very strange. So we got close to it, and it just turned and ran off into the woods. I've never seen one like that before. I don't know if that thing was a wolf or something else entirely. Maybe an alien wolf or something. I don't know. I don't know what that thing was, but I've never seen anything like it. I got the impression from that encounter that it was maybe curious or watching us, but I'll never forget the goat-like horns that sat on top of its head. Oh, and another thing I want to tell you about is yet another creature I've seen walking a trail by a logging road that we go to. I was out in the woods one day with my brother again, and we're walking across this old logging trail when we saw something move out of the corner of our eyes. We turned and looked, and there was this weird creature just standing there staring at us. It was a cross between a deer and a goat. I don't know what else to call it. I mean, it had a deer's body and a goat's head with horns. It had a long neck, and it was standing on its hind legs. It just stood there staring for a second, and then quickly turned and ran off. You want to hear another one that's weird? I was out hunting by myself one time, and sitting in my tree stand. Different than the first one I shared with you. I was watching the trail when, all of a sudden, this weird creature comes walking out of the woods. I remember it was a very sunny day, and I could see this thing clearly. It was a bipedal creature. It was maybe the same height about a man, maybe a little shorter, but it was hunched over like it was in pain. It had a long, thin body and was barefoot. It had long, skinny arms, legs, and very long, spindly fingers and a thin neck. No hair on it, but it did not look human. It had this weird head and no ears. It was a very strange-looking creature. I remember the strangest thing about it was that it had a weird-shaped head, very reminiscent to that of a horse. And I remember looking at it and thinking, what in the world is that? It walked along the trail and then it stopped. It just stopped and didn't move. I kept looking at it. I did not think it would come after me, but I was still scared. So I kept looking at it, wondering what I should do if it decided to come after me. I already knew. I would shoot it. I was just going to wait to see what it would do. It stood there for a few more minutes, perfectly still, and then vanished. Anyways, as I've said before, I've had to deal with a handful of these strange encounters and creatures, but man, some of these are just too much to handle for me. I hope you could at least get enjoyment out of my experiences. If anything, maybe they will be some use to you. Feel free to email me back if you have any questions. Not my story, but my grandmother, who grew up on the Navajo reservation. She has some pretty scary stories of encountering what she calls black witches. She refuses to name them by their name for fear of calling them. She always told me they are evil, and certain parts of the res you need to stay away from. They never show themselves to the living, and they have the power to possess the living. She told me that she was once attacked by one of these witches, and was unable to move until she was rescued. She told me that if I ever encountered one, I should close my eyes and pray for God's protection. When I asked her why she did not call the police before when seeing them, she responded that police can't do anything about them. They don't handle and refuse to handle paranormal and spiritual matters. These are demons, and that unless you yourself have the right power, you are powerless. My grandmother is a very strong woman, and I never for a second doubt anything she has said. She is not a liar. I know in my heart that she is a good, truthful woman. I am a full-fledged believer myself in the spiritual world, and she has had many encounters with spirits, and have seen many others that things couldn't see. She has seen ghosts, orbs, shadow people, and all types of other things, including these shapeshifter beings, along with also having been attacked by them as well. She has also encountered what she believes are these strange reptilian demonic beings. She has seen them and has been attacked by them. She was in bed one night sleeping and heard an extremely loud sound, as if something was dropped down the stairs. It was loud enough to wake her up, so she opens her eyes and looks towards the door. She saw the shadow of a figure standing there. It wasn't that of a person. It was much larger. She tried to scream, but couldn't move. She was paralyzed. Only had the ability to blink her eyes. It was there for a few seconds and then was gone. She knows it was not of this world. She has had many other encounters with these shapeshifter spirits, and they all have one thing in common. They're evil. There was this one encounter, of course, that she had told me later on that it was trying to break in and harm her. She was around 12 or 13 when this happened, years and years back. You have to remember, these shapeshifter spirits are very violent. She also has a friend who lives in the middle of nowhere. She lives in a small town without any other houses around, except for her own. There's no power to her house, so she has to use solar panels to power her own lights. She has a large generator that powers. She has had many encounters with the paranormal herself. She too has seen shadow people, orbs, and many other things. Her house is constantly being attacked by these evil shape-shifting spirits. the same ones that attacked my grandmother at a young, tender age. She has seen it many times, and yes, it is terrifying. She has had her house broken into, destroyed. She has had many of her stuff broken and destroyed. She has even been attacked by these spirits like my grandmother, and has been scratched, stabbed, clawed, and worse. She has been awakened in the middle of the night, holding her chest in pain, and her heart feels as if it is going to explode out of her body. She has a feeling that these spirits are connected to her house. She says she feels these spirits are trying to take her over. She's been to the doctor and has had numerous tests. They cannot find anything wrong with her. She just says these things are trying to kill her, and that she is constantly being monitored. I know in my heart that the spirits are trying to take her life. The spirits are these shapeshifters who can astral project and attack in spirit form. The worst was when my grandmother was held down and, well, you know. The shapeshifter demon did that to her when she was 15, just to make her suffer while she had to lay there, agonizing, paralyzed. Even her grandfather suffered a massive stroke and heart attack at the hands of these beings. I don't know how much you know about them, but if you can, do yourself a favor and don't go anywhere near the res and stay away from these beings. A few years ago, I met a man. We connected instantly, and for a while, I thought he was my soulmate. The only problem was, he had to keep going out of town for work. I had no idea what he did, and he never told me. I knew he was lying to me, though, but I couldn't help but love him. I loved his accent, his wit, his passion, his personality. One night, I went to his house and he was in his kitchen, just staring at the wall. When he saw me, he said in a low voice, "I have to leave, I'm sorry." He had done this several times already. Strange behavior and leaving all the time. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "I can't do this anymore." He didn't say anything. He gave me a hug, escorted me out, and left as well. That was the last time I saw him, and I never found out what he did, but I think he knows what I would do if I ever found out. So, a few days later, after I got home from my last trip to see him, I saw my neighbor walking her dog. She waved and we started chatting. I told her I was trying to get back into the dating scene, and she told me about this guy she had met. "I don't know what it is about him," she said, "but he's just so different. He's got a great sense of humor, and he's really into ancient cultures. I think he works for some big company. He's always going on these trips." I told her I had the same kind of feeling with the guy that I had been seeing. She told me he was the one, especially when she showed me the picture. Then she tells me that he says that he's a skinwalker, a witch who wears the skins of animals to become one with the animal spirit in order to take its powers. I was skeptical, but I had been feeling something strange about that guy. I had never even heard of a skinwalker, but as I began looking it up, I found a story in the news about a man who had been killed by his family while trying to steal their power. It said that the skinwalkers are born with the power to shapeshift, but they can acquire the powers of other animals by wearing their skin. I don't know what to think. I'm not sure if he's a skinwalker or just a liar with an animal fetish, and that he's somehow back from the dead. Either way, I'm done. I had a pretty incredible journey years back on what I like to call a spirit trip to the desert. While the trip was incredible, at the very least, I experienced something that terrified me and shook me to my core, and met the guardian of the woods. I just want to say up front that while I was taking ayahuasca, the encounter itself was more than just me dealing with physical beings. I was dealing with spiritual beings. You see, while being on ayahuasca, my third eye was opened and allowed me to come into contact with these spiritual entities. I was walking through the desert, and going through this forested portion on a dark night, when I heard rustling, so I turn to look and see what made the sound, and petrified when I see a row of dark figures approaching me. I knew down in my soul, these were skinwalkers. I tried to run, but they were too fast. They grabbed me, held me down. I felt their claws around my neck. They dragged me. I couldn't breathe. They were going to kill me. They were sucking the life force out of me, and I knew I was going to die. As I felt my life draining from my body, I closed my eyes and accepted my fate. Then I heard a voice. It was different. It was a deep man's voice, and he says, "I'm the protector of the forest. I am the protector of nature. I am the protector of the animals. I am the protector of the people. I am the protector of all things natural. Who are you to come into my land and try to destroy my people?" I felt the skinwalkers immediately release their grip, and I heard them say, "We are your people." And then I was alone. I saw this man, just him, and he tells me his name was Weya. He said that he was the protector, and I told him I was sorry that I had come into his land and disrupted his people. He let me go and allowed me to leave virtually unharmed, for the most part. I left that night a much stronger person, we'll just say that, and I've never endured such an experience before in my life. I know this story probably sounds kooky, and you might write me off as, "Oh, he was on ayahuasca," but I'm telling you, this night, I met spiritual interdimensional entities. That is what happened. One day, back last year, at the start of the whole pandemic, I sent my daughter on a grocery run because I'm partially disabled after a bad work accident nearly 9 years ago now. It was in the evening time, and we're roughly about an hour away from the store, so it would take her a bit of time to get there, get the food, and come back. Well, enough time had passed at that point that it was getting later and later, much past the point she should be getting back home, and I was getting concerned. I tried calling her phone, but much of the drive to the store is no service. By the way, we live out in the middle of nowhere, up in the mountains, and so there isn't much service through most of the drive. As it was getting later, now nearly an hour after, she should have gotten back to me, like last time. I was getting nervous and very worried. You know how mothers get. I kept checking outside and checking my phone. Nothing. I was looking through the window of the house, wondering where my daughter was. She had gone to buy some groceries for dinner, but now it was getting dark, and that mountain road is dangerous at night sometimes. So now my heart is pumping. I say a quick prayer and went to the door to open it, because I swear in that moment, I thought I heard her outside. I could have sworn I heard her voice. Just as I walked past the window to the door, I noticed something outside. I turn around, and there was this hideous-looking thing trying to press its face up against the window and break in. I scream, running into the bedroom to grab my phone to call the police. The next thing you know, this thing is trying to break through the window, and it's hissing at me. I'm now lying by the bed on the floor, in full view of this thing, and I'm terrified. I'm gonna die. I'm going to die. I was convinced. And like the cavalry showing up in the nick of time, I catch a glimpse of the truck headlights pulling up, shining through the window. And I see this thing turn to look, and it takes off, darting into the trees. My daughter comes rushing into the house, checks on me. I am hysterical. I'm a 55-year-old woman with a bad hip. Had that thing gotten in the house, I would have been a goner. She saw it too. I know she did. We don't know what we saw, but it was really ugly looking and resembles a dog somewhat. I told her about hearing her voice just before I saw that thing, and she wonders if it had been watching us and mimicking my daughter's voice. My daughter knows a lot more about this kind of thing than I do. She suggested that it could be something called a skinwalker, but I don't really know what that is. So she showed me your YouTube page and how you have so many episodes on this topic. Do you think you could help me out? What sort of being did we encounter?